please welcome my guest for this afternoon, Many.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome on in, Many.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I'm pretty sure that we have a good many of the many in chat already, but for those of you who, or rather, for those who might not be familiar with you, if you could introduce yourself.
All right. Yes, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Minnie. I am a Yuanti Kobold VTuber. And really, all you're going to find on my channel right now is a lot of screaming, me yelling at chat, which I was already doing before we started because Michael rolled in and the first thing he did is call me a goblin because that is a strangely common misconception.
Yes, kobolds and goblins are indeed separate, very different, especially in the world of D&D and other fantasy and RPG settings. And we're actually going to get to that a little bit down the line. But something that happened just before we went live, well, first off, we wound up being on time, which I think I may have broken a streak for you. So sorry, not sorry on that. You mentioned that you're usually very late. And with good reason, because you are very busy IRL as well. And that one thing you are very open about is that you are a PhD student,
Yes.
currently working on your 7th degree, which we'll get to later because good Lord. But that one of the things you do is also run a lab, and that due to the nature of your work, sometimes that means you get called into the lab at absurd hours. And apparently you were there at 4 a.m. Have you slept many?
I slept for about 2 hours before I had to go in.
I know, but I mean, have you slept since you went in and now?
Oh, no.
Oh dear. Well, thank you for still being here. I hope that you're running on at least a little bit more than fumes.
Well, this is normal.
That's fair, I suppose.
Yeah, this is completely normal. Many sleep dodges. Yeah, I do. I have a tendency to get the amount that I need, and that's about it.
I can identify with that. I'm the type of person, so one thing I've been open about is that outside of VTuber Talk, I work events every so often. Certainly not in 2020 and 2021, which is part of why VTuber Talk exists, but that I've very much gotten back into the swing of that. And when I work events, I definitely identify with the you get the sleep you need and that you allow yourself to crash afterwards. But the thing is, for you and your work, that means that you're running at that type of capacity essentially consistently.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother thing. And I have a lot of respect for it, but also, man, you do take care of yourself. But you know, at the same time, you've been at this for long enough. I'm sure you know your limits. And that's a very interesting thing to learn over time. Do you have any like tips for folks who might be, having the type of schedule that you have, or just stories of things that you've found work for you that may or may not end up being common for others?
Well, hilariously, I do actually know the neuroscience behind sleep.
Yeah, that actually is
We've talked
that's
about
literally your area of
yeah.
expertise.
we talked about it where I do circadian rhythm research. And so my recommendation was don't do this, but if you have to, find places in your lab that you like sleeping. Like get a really good chair.
Mhm.
I literally have gamer chairs in my lab that like they pull out the little footrests so that we can sleep in the lab if we need to.
Ooh, very nice. That one thing that I sort of learned to do over time is how to sleep on planes and therefore how to sleep
Oh,
sitting up. That
yes.
it is something that is a learned skill, but you can learn it. That you just need to find the right position of what is most comfortable. And like sometimes for me, that's even if I just have to lean forward so that my head is in my lap and that I have
Mm-hmm.
that. Sometimes if the chair is nice and you can lean back, that works. But uh, I suppose experimentation of just what gets you the sleep that you need, and eventually you'll find it one way or another.
Oh, I can sleep standing up.
That's impressive. Also concerning.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's like when you're as short as I am, like you learn how to like lock your knees and sleep in a tub if you need to, which I do not recommend. Do not sleep in a tub. But I am just tall enough that if I lock my legs that like I don't go anywhere. So I can do that in the shower and I will like lean against the wall and sleep for like 10 minutes and wake up and be like, the water's cold. I need to get out.
Mm, I will say power naps are really, really good if you can learn how to do them.
Mm-hmm.
There's those classic, 10, 20-minute bursts of sleep that I do not know the science as well as you do, but I know that they do have value.
Yes.
And it's, again, something that you sort of have to learn how to do. But they can really make that difference if you're not able to get the sustained sleep, which is obviously preferable, but as we acknowledge, not always viable.
If you skip a night of sleep, the next night, make sure to get at least 2 nights of REM or 2 cycles of REM sleep, and then you're good.
Yeah. Also, agoraphobic, thank you for the follow.
I'll go.
So, I guess since we're already here, we might as well cover it. 7 degrees. I knew already that you were a PhD student, but it wasn't until earlier this week when we were talking that you mentioned the number 7. First off, that's a wild number for anyone, one way or another. But two, you mentioned that these degrees, while they have a semblance of logic in their progression, that generally speaking, there is no line of work or study that you need 7 to be proficient in. So I'm curious, what was the journey of these 7 degrees? And just obviously, as always, privacy first. You don't need to divulge anything secret, but if you're willing to say, the degree is in this and that it
Yes.
led to interest in that I am very curious this sequence because I don't think I've ever had anyone on this show that has that many.
So a lot of my degrees are essentially, oh, if you take one extra class, you can claim this degree.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where it started. And then that kind of took me down other paths because 7 points of exhaustion. Yes. So it starts off with my associates, which was one of those things where, and I will always tell people this, if you have to go to school and someone tries to give you like any shit about community college, that's not someone you need in your life. I started back on community college. Like I went my first my first set of degrees that I actually quit my last semester because I was doing microbiogenetics and zoology as a triple major and a double minor in um in chemistry and what was it? It was essentially ethics. So it was like a useless degree. But it was like because I was doing the triple major, I had enough credits to claim the 2 minors. But what ended up happening was when you're doing genetics back in the time I was doing, no one knows, by the way, how old I am. And it's the funniest thing because everybody thinks I'm so much younger than I am and it makes me so happy. But so I'm not gonna I could have done that there and then whoever was here would have known, but I'm not gonna tell you. So Um, but when I was doing my first set of degrees, I ended up quitting my last semester, and so I was like, "This is too expensive to go to school when I'm going to be overqualified for what I want to do and underqualified for anything else." And so I ended up quitting my last semester, and then 5 years later, I went back into school and I started at community college. If you're transferring to a 4-year university, then 9 chance out of 10 you're going to have enough for that associate. So I grabbed my associates on my way through, and then when I went to school, I got my main degree in psychology because I wanted to start with, I guess, a useless degree. If you get a degree in psychology, while I love them, go for a minor. It's going to be a lot more useful to you. And then while I was there, I fell in love with statistics, and so my semester after the first one, I got my degree in applied statistics. And so I was going to go straight into a job and I got convinced to stay for my master's. So I got a master's in behavioral psychology, which is really fun because I understand human behavior more than I would like to, despite having only done animal research. And so after that, I started on my PhD, which is what I'm doing now. And during that, I got my master's in animal science, which was kind of like the flip side of the behavioral psychology. It was essentially the more research oriented route of that, despite my master's having like a thesis to go with it. I also have the master's that I got here, which is in biostatistics, which essentially was 2 more classes that I already had, and then my animal science, which is just following the same degree that I'm getting now, which is my PhD in neuroscience. So it was one of those things where they were like, "Yeah, but you could have this." I'm like, "I'm gonna be so overqualified for everything." They're like, "But you'll have these degrees." I was like, "I will never need wallpaper for one wall because I will always have it covered with these."
I like Kale and Roar in the chat. their theory, their commentary is the Yuan-Ti roots give her the dragon instinct of hoarding. Many's treasure is degrees. So, every dragon has that thing that they covet most, that thing that they're attracted to. And for you, it is the degrees, and that you sleep on the pile of certificate printouts or potentially use them as wallpaper as you see fit.
I wish I could deny that, but when I, again, transferring to a four-year university from community college, I had that thing in the back of my head where I was like, right, but now I have to prove that I'm supposed to be here kind of thing. So I was like, how many chords and like the little shawl things, like how many of those can I get and walk down, when I get my four-year degree, like proving that I am not only supposed to be here, but I have to be better than everybody. So I had
And
9 sets of chords walking down.
good lord,
It's
and
ridiculous.
I thought I had a lot. Well, so I certainly cannot say I have nearly that, but I identify at least on a sort of a base conceptual level that I picked up a double major simply because it was a very easy thing of I was already looking to major in marketing, that I went to business school, um, and that there was a basically the way things work and the number of credits that you need to get, it it fell together pretty cleanly where if you just funneled all of your elective credits into another major, that you could just graduate with a double major and not have to stay for even an extra semester, that it was just that simple. And it meant, all right,
That's
I don't get
beautiful.
to really choose any of my other electives, but at the same time, there weren't any electives in the business school that I was super, super keen on taking and that I felt I was going to be missing out on it. So it was a pretty simple thing of, okay, yeah, so I'm just going to do this and it'll be a bit more focused. And yeah, that's fine. I already had to take, the intro level courses for basically every business major as part
Ugh,
of just the,
yeah.
foundational thing of the business school. And found one that I liked as a double. And I was like, yeah, it'll look nice on paper. Don't know if I'll ever use it. Don't think I'll ever use it. And in some ways, I wound up using that one a bit more than the
Oh,
actual
that's
marketing degree,
nice.
which is still, to be fair, not used super often. It was information systems, which is more or less the applied use of computers and computer science for business and analytical decisions. So, not the development of it, it's not computer science, but it's how to use science and technology. So, I can look at a block of code and make a very educated guess on what it does. I certainly can't remember how to write code. I know a bit more about databases than the average person who went through business school, stuff like that. Um, and it wound up being kind of nice because I now work in the games industry. And so when I work with folks who are the engineers, who are the coders, that I can sometimes make marginally more informed commentary or guesses. Like if I see a bug or, this feels like it could be a loop that went wrong or that, check this type of thing. I'm not always right, but I can at least make that type of educated guess, which is sort of amusing.
That's Yeah, I was gonna say that's still a talent. Having like as a coder as well, because with the PhD thing, they're like, all right, so you need to do something, learn how to do it yourself. Excuse me. But like having someone look at your code and be like, that right there. I don't know what's wrong, but I know that looks wrong is so helpful. You have no
It's like
idea.
I can't even necessarily do that, but I can just sort of conceptually say the way the thing
Your
that I
logic is
expect
bad.
to be doing with the
Hmm.
logic is like it feels like this is how the logic is currently written. But if you wrote the logic this way, I don't know the syntax of how to do that, but I think that might work a bit more elegantly. So at least I can do that. I can also
You're everybody's
identify
rubber
with,
duck.
yeah.
You're the rubber duck. It talks back.
Yay.
That would be nice.
I can also identify with statistics being the fun math. Uh,
Hmm.
I I didn't mind algebra in middle and high school. Calculus and I did not get along.
No.
Statistics can actually be cool. Statistics
Yes.
feels useful and real and logical. I still don't like calculus, just even
No.
conceptually. I understand its use, and hey, if you're the type of mind that loves calculus, enjoys it, and thinks it's beautiful, good for you. I'm not gonna yuck your yum there, but I will say that, like I said,
Psycho
calculus and
behavior.
I were
Psycho behavior.
not
No, I'm just kidding.
calculus and I were not friends. But
Mm-mm.
stats can be cool. Stats has a lot of really interesting uses. Um, but for your degrees, it feels like there's sort of three eras there. That there was the first era where it was the initial stuff at community college, and then you had the second era, I suppose, where you started to wind up in the direction where you're going now, with psychology really sort of being that turning point, and now getting into the PhD and everything, where it's really honing in on that area of expertise for you. But at the same time, all of these degrees still do have that logical thread of, all right, you started with biology and just the interest in the behavior of living things, whether it be human or otherwise, ends up still being that underlying thread. So uh, it doesn't feel like anything that you have done has wound up being something that you ended up having to discard entirely. That certainly, I'm guessing some of those seven are going to end up being a bit more relevant than the others, but there's there's still a level of consistency here.
Mhm. Yep. I got lucky. Like I said, community college, it's great. I kind of initially went for, like, they have a lot of the 2-year very smart tailored degrees where they're like medical coding or medical this, that, and the other thing. And that's what I was going to do. And I had to take an abnormal psychology class. And I realized during that class that I was like, if I just do this 2-year degree just to get into the workforce, I'm going to be miserable. And while everybody hears me, the moment anybody says anything academia, I will be the first one to shit on it because it is such a toxic environment where I'm like, if you don't have to go to school to do your job, don't go to school. You're going to be in
Mhm.
debt. It's really bad for your mental. Like, I am the first one to say that. But having those 2-year tailored degrees is such a nice thing, and
That
it's
can be
very, very
really
smart.
powerful. That if
Yes.
that is your area of interest, and that you find a program that teaches you that, not only is it going
Yes.
to make sure that yes, you legitimately just have that knowledge, but then if you're going into especially a more niche
Hmm.
field, especially one that is scientific, having those degrees can make a big difference. I, on
Yes.
the other hand, that I very much share your line of thinking, and that's how I knew right away that I shouldn't be getting more degrees. That in the business
Yes.
world, an MBA used to sort of mean something, but nowadays, especially in my humble opinion, MBAs are freaking useless. I think it
Yeah.
is much better if you are looking to be in, finance, marketing, anything that is a, quote unquote business type of thing. I think it is better to go on and get that extra 2, 3 years of work experience in your
Yes.
industry under your belt than to get the MBA, because the thing with business that is really cool but really difficult is that every industry is so different, and that business schools have to teach the basics. And especially in marketing, like marketing varies wildly, not only from industry to industry, but company to company, even in the same
Yes.
industry. Um, Finance and accounting, okay, that makes sense because that's going to be pretty damn consistent across the
Yeah.
board. You need to know how to do your numbers and make sure that your books are correct. Um, but past that, just I knew right away because I wanted to work in the gaming industry since I was very young. I didn't know at first if I wanted to be a coder, and eventually I realized, oh, I'm kind of good at marketing and that type of stuff. Uh, but I went to business school still with the mindset of I want to find a way to direct this into the gaming industry. And goodness knows, business school is not going to teach stuff relevant to the gaming industry. But to be fair, they didn't even really teach stuff that was necessarily particularly relevant to any industry, and that's just how it has to be in that field because it varies. And that's part of why it's not relevant to get a whole bunch of degrees in the business fields in particular.
Yeah.
And I just knew, all right, I don't need to bother with this. But for you in that line of work, it makes a lot of sense. Is like I said, especially in science ones where you need to have this information that there is not one right way to do marketing. There is a
Mhm.
right and a wrong way to do scientific experiments, and certain, you know, science and the things we know is certainly evolving. But
Yes.
you want to make sure that you know what we know at this point in time.
Sorta, actually. So it's kind of like going on the thing where a degree used to mean something. It's basically the paywall of education, and which is why another reason why you were saying that yes, go get that expertise instead in the field, and I agree. Even going into science, because a lot of times you can start as an RA, a research assistant, and then you find out what is, like, it's to me so much more important if you work in a lab and all of a sudden you're like, man, I don't want to do this. That is so much more important than going, which is me. My thing is honing me in. I'm like, I want to do this research. My lab can do this research, but then we could
Mhm.
do this, this, and this. I have like 4 side projects. It's it's dumb. But I want to there's again, I can't narrow down what I want and what I don't want to do. I just know that I have 2.5 years left and I don't know what I can do in that time period, but we're gonna push it. But like you were saying, there's not one right way to do marketing. It's actually the same with science now. Like my whole focus is research, which is what it's been since day one. Is like, well, once I realized that okay, doing this 2-year degree is not going to be enough to keep me happy. I was like, research is what I want to do, and the reason that I want to do that, which is hilarious, I think it goes a little bit with being a masochist, is that being wrong is job security. No one cares if you're right all the time. It's such a strange like juxtaposition in the research world that everybody's looking for that p-value at 0.05. They want that statistical significance to make sure that
Mhm.
like I'm learning this and I've figured this out, but that doesn't tell you anything. That just tells you that you did the right statistics. Being able to learn how to answer a question isn't something that they can teach you in school. That's the fun thing. Why I
That's
have so
very
many
fair.
degrees in statistics is because I have to learn what question to ask, how to answer it with the behavior itself, and then how to get the statistics that say, while I'm not answering my question, I am at least telling you that if I do this again, the chances of me getting this set of data is this low. Like,
Mhm.
if I'm wrong, the chances of me getting this data are this low, and that's what that little value means. And when you're ever reading a paper and they're like, "Oh, I got a significant value of this," and people are like, "I don't know what that means, but it sounds cool." That's all that's telling you is whether the chances of you being completely wrong are high or not. And so, if you keep answering your questions and you keep getting that significance value, that just means that you know it on a base level. What you want to learn in research and why I love it so much is if we can predict what this behavior is going to do or what this neuron is going to do, we want to get to the point where all of a sudden our predictions are not working.
'Cause
And
that
I
means that
love
you've
that.
found something, and that's really
Yes.
interesting 'cause you sort of just made me realize, eh, something that I've always known but never really figured out a good phrasing for is that statistics is the math and science of learning and of
Yes.
finding information. Well, obviously finding information, but literally just sort of the science of learning. And like you said, it teaches you how to ask questions because
Mhm.
the the question that you're asking, the hypothesis that you're trying to get that p-value for, depending on how you phrase it, that's going to have a big difference on if that p-value gets to significance or not, and just how you run your study to ask that question. That it's not only how do you ask a question, but how do you do the implementation of asking the question in a sense. And
Yes.
that especially for someone who, you know, you have to enjoy learning on some base level if you're going to be getting this many degrees. And that in a way that is just it seems like a very sort of logical and pure expression of the desire to continue learning.
Yeah. I love stats. I love them. And again, it's like you were saying with like calculus. Calculus and I didn't get along. I didn't fail it, but I dropped calculus 4 semesters, but like in a row because I was like, I can't get it because I'm very
Mm,
big picture. The moment someone told me that calculus was the math of physics, I was fine. I was able to do it. I still hate it. But statistics is to me the wrap up of the story. I actually really love like a lot of the process that like thesis writers or dissertation writers, anything like that hates is the writing process. I think that's great because that's that point where you get to wrap up your story and tell it. Like, what have you been doing
mm,
the last 2 years? You get to say, this is what I've done, and this is how I can prove that this is what I've done. And I think that to me is really cool. Like, I just actually got a publication in Nature, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, science journal. Um, and I wasn't expecting it on our first run, but
that's
we
really
just
cool.
got published.
Congrats.
Yeah,
Like
thank you.
that's a big
I'm
deal. Just
exciting.
getting
Yeah.
published, period. Big deal. Getting published in a premier publication in your field of
Mhm.
study is, you know, that's
Especially during your PhD.
oh yeah,
Like
absolutely.
that's insane. Like I have one publication, well, I have two. Well, prior to this one, I have two. One of them is a methodology paper, which is me explaining that this is one of the like this is a viable um option on how to do things. And this is Fnir's research, which is what I did with psychology. Which is this research is one of the reasons why I went into neuroscience hilariously. Um and then my other one, which is what I got from my thesis work, I literally rolled in, did an entire paper on how the guy who's leading in that field is absolutely has no business being considered leading in his field because everything that he says is such a robust paradigm isn't. And then I left because that's funny. You just like kick the hornet's nest and then
I was gonna
run.
say that's,
Great job.
you like,
So much fun.
it's the right thing to do ethically and scientifically to say, "Wait a minute, something's wrong here."
It's
But
also petty.
oh boy, that's, it's very bold and, eh you've mentioned, like you said, that academia is fraught with issues, and we'll get to that.
Oh
But
yeah.
it doesn't matter what industry you're in. That if you're going to, like you said, just kick the hornet's nest, walk in and be like, "Yeah, the person who is considered a leading authority on this, whether it be business, whether it be science, anything like that," but to just sort of waltz in and say, "Yeah, I think they're wrong on everything, and here's why," and then
Yep.
to be right is really cool and really, well, frankly, revolutionary in a way that you are literally upsetting the
Mhm.
status quo, but it's probably not going to make you friends. That it's the type of thing that you
Oh
would sort of
no.
you'd sort
Oh,
of
not at
hope
all.
that conceptually that the ideal storybook ending is that the person who you sort of knock off the perch is in fact this benevolent academic mind that's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like, I care about
Never.
the science and I care about the research, and I am glad that you have pushed me to be better and it made me realize while I'm wrong, and that I have learned from this. But I recognize that is very seldom how things work.
You think fandoms are bad when it comes to like rabid fanboying and rabid fangirling. Oh no, I got death threats over this.
Ugh.
Yeah. Like I'm not kidding when like you with conference and that's one of the interesting things too. Like conferences are what we do all the time. And as the student, like as someone who's just walking around and like reading these papers, everybody's like, "Oh man, this scientist, the one that has their name on everything, they're the big one." And then as you're going to conferences, you realize that wait a minute, the PhD that's on this paper isn't the authority. It's the students that are. Because we're the ones running all the experiments. We're the ones learning the story. They're just the ones guiding the
Yeah,
direction.
you are the staff, you are the ones that are
Yeah.
actually, like you said, doing the work. That it's similar to in business where it is not the CEO that is running the business. The
Mhm.
CEO hopefully is providing guidance, valuable guidance even, but they aren't the
Yeah.
ones doing that frontline legwork to get things done.
And yeah, and that was I had a really big eye-opening experience on one of the conferences that we went to, and he was a keynote speaker. And so I was really excited because I had my poster done. I had all this really cool data. I literally had my laptop set up next to it with a QR code that I was like, if you do this on there, like you can see my individual data for each one of my rats for all the things that I did. And I had run into such an issue, and it was funny because I essentially got gassed up by all of my PhDs that I was working with at the time, which was a huge amount of them. I was again, even in my first thesis, I'm collabing with other schools. And I had all this stuff and we ran into a problem where what he had said has been, for the last 37 years has been, this robust thing that's supposed to
The
happen all
standard.
of a sudden didn't. And I was like, "Why? This doesn't make any sense." And like, it was really bad because it's renewal and resurgence, which is a type of relapse. And I was doing everything what I thought was correctly, and I was so ready to see this result. And then when it came test day, I actually saw the opposite, and I'm in tears. I call my because that was the first big like quote unquote scientific failure that I had, and I
And
call
the
my
initial reaction, I
PhD
assume, is, "Uh-oh, I've done something wrong," especially when you're expecting
devastation.
one thing that
Yes.
you think that you have set something up wrong, that
Mhm.
either part of your preparation or your implementation is not working because of a failure on your part?
Well, it was a what went wrong. It was a panic moment for me because also keep in mind that as a as a PhD student you have 5 years. That's a long time. As a master's student, I actually will even say that I think it's more stressful, way more stressful than my PhD because I only had 2. And my entire first semester was taken by Florence, the hurricane.
Oh,
So I had
joy.
even less time. So I call my PhD at the time and I'm like in tears, literally crying. And I was like, it didn't work. I don't know what happened. And he goes, "This is great." And I'm like, "Excuse the fuck out of me." What do you mean this is great? And I will never forget the cadence of his voice when he said this. He goes, "Just remember, Minnie, the rat always acts as he ought to. The problem is you, which means that we can fix it, or we can find out where the other guy went wrong." And I'm like, "Bro, you have a job." I don't, like, and I'm panicking because this is where I didn't understand that, like, this isn't bad. This means that we can either perfect what we do because the way that I did it was completely different than anybody else had. Um, because I used olfactory senses, which is like smells and different things
Smell.
like that. And so rats are very good at that. There is an entire section of their brain that is like 10 times the size of ours. And I mean, that is like if you blow up a rat brain to the size of ours, it is like 100 times the size of ours. But even just in their tiny little brain, it's still 10 times the size of ours. Um,
Oh, so that's 10
they
times in absolute,
yeah,
not in relativity.
yes.
Good lord.
Yes. They are basically 90% smell. And so I was like, this is great. And we found out that the reason that it didn't work is because I was efficient. I was not giving enough time between experiments because I would run squads of 3 rats at a time. When I was switching them because I was the only one running 5 squads in a day, which took forever. I wasn't giving 10 to 20 minutes for the smells to dissipate. And so because of
Mm.
that, I was setting up a context that I didn't realize it was, which was fascinating. Like that was the coolest thing to finally realize that yes, I was the problem. But now we've also learned that the rats are doing something. They're setting their own context that I'm not setting.
Yeah,
So
that you, by accident, may have actually had a huge breakthrough just in animal science, period.
yes.
That
Yes. And
it
it
not
was it
even
was
in
so
your
neat.
not even in your area of interest, not
Hmm.
in any way related to your study or what you were trying to do, but that you found something in a tangential but unrelated field of science that you can then go to them and be like, "Hey, so I
Yep.
found this thing."
And that's exactly what I did. And that's I love when you can work with people who are collaborative and not competitive, and it's 100% what I did, and my PhD actually hated it because he was like, "Why are you giving them this information?" And I'm like, "So that they can do something with it
Because
because
I
you're
have
not
this
going to."
information.
Yeah. And he was like, "Right, but." I'm like, "No, no, no, there's no but. Like that's the end of it. That's it. Is I have this information that you're not going to do anything with. Let me set them up for more research." And that's again, the difference between a good mentor and not is one that will allow you to be, to work with others versus one that goes, "No, no, no, we need the paper."
And,
Like, I don't want to
uh
stay in academia. I don't care about your papers. Like, I just want to go into industry. But that to me is again where psychology failed. They are very competitive and they're not interdisciplinary where they should be. I saw psychology research as very, very lazy where we had a neuroscience lab across the way, but we made all these big claims about this is how it's working in the brain, and we never looked at it.
so to be
And I
clear,
hated that.
is the mentor who was on that phone call and said this is a good thing that the rat isn't wrong, and that we can fix things, that is that the same or different mentor as the one that said, "Why are you sharing this information?"
Same one.
Interesting, because I feel like,
Mhm.
in one way, they had a fantastic impact on you and that they had a very good way of thinking and a very good outlook on, all right, this went wrong, but that is a good thing, and that they were a very positive influence there. But then on this other topic,
Mhm.
that they are perhaps a little bit more closed minded.
It's very He was very good at the one-on-one, but when it came to broader picture, he was very old school.
That's super
So
interesting. Like
it's
that's a whole thing
yeah.
of psychology in and of itself that
Mhm.
has. I have to assume that there's been like psychological studies of the psychology field because
Oh, very much
it's
so, yes.
meta, but at the same time, I feel like that's a very intriguing thing to look at in and of itself.
Oh, yeah. It's they do a lot of stuff like that, because right now there's a whole movement on fixing what is wrong with academia. And I wholeheartedly support it. I also understand that right now, this is gonna sound so bad, but we are waiting for a generation to die out. One that right now is leading in the field, so it's very hard to ignore them because they do have good points. But when it comes to the betterment of science, they are holding us back. Where it's that competitive everybody like literally in order to stay or to make tenure for most schools, you have to have X amount of publications, you have to keep up so many like students pushing them through, and it's not tailored to actual education or really teaching people how to be better scientists. It's teaching people how to publish, which in a way is good, but also you have to have that balance where you need to understand that like this is why it's so hard to stay in academia and be a good scientist is because you like the I guess the emphasis is more on getting a publication, not learning the science. Like I've seen amazing scientists have to go, this is the most interesting, but that's not going to get funded and we can't get that published. So we have to ignore this or they'll do the put a pin in it. Like we'll go back to it later when we have extra funding and then they have to drop it because
Hmm.
that's not what's going to get funding and so therefore we can't do anything. And like that's another reason why I think it's toxic is because the focus is wrong. And I
Yeah,
understand
and
science is expensive. Like everybody, when I tell people like I got a certain grant that was like $200,000 renewed a year. And everybody's like, "Oh, that's so good." I'm like, "That's nothing.
that's not a lot.
That's nothing." Like being told that like a startup professor gets a starting like lab essentially account for 750,000. Everybody's like, "Oh my god, that's so good." That's like two pieces of equipment
Yeah,
because
depending on your
everything
field of
is marked
study,
up.
that it
Yeah.
yeah that it's similar to the healthcare industry in that
Oh,
respect that
yes.
just things are very, very much marked up. Things are very
Mhm.
expensive, and that if you look at the breakdown in terms of accounting, the numbers add up staggeringly fast, and it's
Yeah.
just uh, the there's so much in terms of all the different parts that you're talking about, and like you're saying, there's a lot of essentially old guard folks who have this
Mhm.
very ingrained way of thinking, and that very much extends to business and a lot of industries that just
Yeah, oh, yeah.
in general you have the folks that yes they were very instrumental in building up a lot of big brand names that we know and that are still big today, but that those brand names, what the brands do and what the brands make is very, very different from what they made when those founders, the current CEOs, made the thing. And that
Yes.
while those people are certainly very smart and that they were very good and relevant in their time, that times change and that
Yes.
some folks are not able to adapt as quickly. And that's not their fault. That's, just part of the human brain that you learn and that you work in something for a certain amount of time, that it's, similar to the rat smelling something in its brain, that it creates the context and that it is very
Yes.
difficult to break out of context. And
Mhm.
at the same time, it also means that, all right, if you are in this position of authority and power, and, it's still one that you have completely legitimately earned, that you are going to have trouble adapting. And
Yeah.
for better or worse, it's something that every generation is going to encounter. It is not something that I think that we as a generation are going to be exempt from. That fast forward
Yeah.
20, 30 years, we're going to probably find ourselves in the same rut. And all we can hope to do is, sort of scream at
Be a
ourselves
little
mentally
better.
now
Yeah.
to just make sure that we are open minded and acknowledge that in however long we will be the ones that are going to eh, be a bit more opposed to change and think certain things are not relevant, and that we just need
Mhm.
to try our best to condition ourselves now to fight against what will be a natural reaction in the future. And it's tough.
Yeah, and
It's very
it's
tough.
the if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing, which
Exactly.
is good to a degree. And it's so funny because when you're on the outside looking at that, you can go, yeah, but like I can show you again scientifically, I can put all these things in front of you that show you that what we need to do is change. And kind of like Bard said, and Algo, a streamer calls for war against boomers live.
Live.
Essentially, yes, that's literally what our generation is doing, and not even just my generation of scientists, because I am technically sitting right in the middle of that, which is so cool because I get to see the absolute outlandish ideas of the Zoomers. Like, not even kidding. And like some of them they're just so cool. And just seeing how just what to me even seems like out of the box. And I'm like, I don't know how you're coming up with these ideas, but I love it. But again, it's not going to get funded. And so
Hmm.
you have to find ways to do that, which is why right now my lab is in such a good place because you have my PhD is only a few years older than me. So we're great on being able to he will listen to us very, very well. He's really dumb and he likes to sign on the dotted line before he reads things. But like you'll have that. He's still new, so he's panicking and trying to like get things that work for us and finding out that haha, fine print's a thing. But it's really neat to be able to have someone that we don't have to worry about going, yeah, but this works. And it's like, okay, it worked before, but times are changing. As you say, technology, he can recognize that technology is moving faster than us, which is
Hmm.
why I am super excited. Like I have all this stuff set up and it had fallen through, but I found a way to kind of like fix it. Um I won't unfortunately be on the project, but my biggest issue was that we had all this stuff set up and it fell through because of funding. And I found out that like I can still find a way so that my research that I had set up that was it stretched across 7 different labs. Now only have 5 that are within the project and I still have my finger in the cookie jar, but I am not going to be leading it. It's not going to be forgotten. And that's what I was scared of.
Mm.
Was when you have such a cool idea that is going to make huge ripples, having it just forgotten.
Yeah, just saying, all right, even if I'm not the one stewarding it, even if I'm not the one
Mhm.
carrying out the experiment, knowing that someone is going to be continuing that work, that research, I can
Mhm.
imagine it is a very both satisfying and reassuring feeling.
Yeah, it's bittersweet too, not being able to be a part of it. Because again, I have to make sure and take care of myself first, but I also now have a place to go afterward if I wanted to stay in academia. Which I don't. So, yeah. But it's the collaboration thing is what drew me to neuroscience is because it's very interdisciplinary. It has to be. Because the way that I see it, and again, I got really lucky with my mentor understanding this as well. I am a behaviorist. I deal with the behavior side of things. Neuroscience is not my background. I am always the dumbest person in the room, which is awesome to me. That's a lot of opportunities to learn. Whereas if I'm the one who's trying to tote that I'm the smartest, then I don't have anywhere else to go. And
Hmm.
so I love being the one where people are start to talk and they're like, many are glazing over. I'm like, yeah, I stopped listening when I started taking notes because that's where I realized I don't know what you're talking about. And so I've gotten lucky to where some people will stop and be like, okay, roll it back. Where did you get lost? A lot of times I get scoffed at, but I also have a notebook of words that I'm like, I didn't understand what this word was.
And
So
at the
I'll
same
go look
time,
it up when
I
I get home.
figure those folks are used to people getting lost a lot sooner than you get lost.
The ones that help, yes. The ones that don't love it. They will get off on the idea that they are the smartest one in the room. And that I just don't understand that. Like I hate that mentality. I think it's gross. Those are usually the labs where they look at their undergrads as peons, where I'm the one that's bringing mine Starbucks every day because I'm like, what do you guys want? Like, you do the work that I don't want to because I need to do the science part of it. I need people who are doing my technical work. I don't know why you would treat them like they're peons. I need you. Like,
Yeah, no,
I cannot do my stuff without you. Like,
there's
that's
having an
it's
extra
such a
set of
weird
hands that you
mentality.
can trust to just
Yes.
do a thing and take direction well and be precise is so invaluable that just
Mhm.
literally being able to be in multiple places at the same time,
Yes.
that is literally a superpower. That is a
It
wonderful
is.
thing. And if you're using it to get coffee, that's inefficient.
Yeah. It really is. And I mean, with what we do now, so in comparison to what I did with my first master's versus my PhD, all I did was the behavior side. And that was still a ton of work. Having to run the behavior constantly, and we ran ours every day. And I had at the end, because when I finished my master's, COVID had just started. And so I ended up being, because I was also backup emergency animal care, I was the one that was me and one other person were allowed in the building, and that was it. And so they were like, "Oh, Manny, take over the research." I was like, "No, I'll run theirs for the next 3 weeks, and then I'm gonna up mine." And so instead of running the 12 rats that I had, I ended up taking all 27 spots.
Oh
And
my.
so I was like, I can do this. And so I would do, I would literally run for 7 hours a day on behaviors for the rats. And then I would turn around and do the animal care. So I would like clean all the cages. I would do all that stuff. And for 8 different labs, I think is what I was doing. It was a lot of work. They paid me for like 20 hours because again, academia, awful. They're like, oh, is that
Ugh.
free labor? Awesome. Um, and that's what we did. And so I took that time to just up my research so that I was like, I will be ready when I go into my PhD.
I hadn't
And
even thought
I
of it from
wasn't.
that angle because
Oh, yeah.
obviously, the pandemic changed a lot of things and caused a lot of strange situations. I hadn't even thought about, all right, obviously, you've been doing this type of research and been in school in academia for longer than the past 2, 3 years, and that it must have caused a very
It was
interesting
terrifying.
situation because in some ways, like you said, all right, only a couple of folks are going to be authorized to be in the building at any given point in time, and that it did mean you get an increase in resources, but also for behavioral stuff where you need to bring in outside people to
Mhm.
run things, that it probably put a bit of a stop on that. But at the same time, if you're running rats as your experimentation and not humans, that at least for that part of research, that things would probably be not as interrupted. And then it just becomes a function of, all right, how many humans would you need to run that experiment? That it's not an issue of the test subjects, it's just being able to actually run the experiment.
But we weren't allowed in the building. The only reason I was allowed, and I wasn't even supposed to continue my research, I just kind of ignore everybody when they tell me not to do things. Um, we were all supposed, like, we all were to stop. I got an extension. I got a short extension, and then I was like, "Yeah, that's cool. No one knows what I'm doing because no one cares anymore. So I'm just gonna do what I need to do." Um, but it was actually really scary. One of the things that people don't talk about is that a lot of things when it comes to emergency situations, we don't talk about what happens with animals and things like that. And I actually had to fight with some of the upper like government agencies in North Carolina when it all started. Um Thankfully with Florence I had already had some experience with it, but they were willing, their idea was that these animals were not how do they put it? Basically they were expendable and they wanted us to wipe out our entire stock. And I had to fight that because one of the things when it comes to mice research, which I don't do, but the other labs did, was that there are specific strands of mice that are literally bred to do certain experiments.
Yeah.
And had we had to wipe those out, that was not only a loss of 6 years of research to get to that point, but then if they would have had to make that colony again, that would have been another 2 to 3 years minimum if they got lucky with the genetic.
Mm.
And like that would have been devastating to that. It would have shut that lab down.
Yeah, that I'm sure that this was not you as an individual, that I'm guessing that every other person at the lab was also very much on board, that this was not
Yeah, they were
uh
on board. They helped a little bit, but me being the one that was in there, I
you had
had
to
to
be the
fight
vanguard.
for, yeah, I had to be the one to go, "No, no, no, I am willing to do this." Like at one point, I cuz they were closing everything down where we were, where people weren't allowed to leave, like you weren't allowed to go to the store. There was only like delivery services and things of that nature that were like, like it got really scary out there, and I was like, "I am willing to sleep at the school for 3 weeks if I have to." Like if we're closing things down, we got a couch, we got a lounge, I
Yeah,
can
that if
stay
if
there,
I'm
it's
staying
fine.
in one place, Might as well.
Yeah, I didn't have to, but it got to the point where they were like, "Yeah, but you'd have to do this." I'm like, "I don't care what it takes. I will do that." Like, you don't understand. Like, I can't just watch this happen because, like, these are my friends. These are not just my coworkers. These are people that we have gone through, like, essentially trauma bonding through our masters together.
Yeah, basically.
Like I'm not gonna just let this go because you won't listen to them because they're not allowed in the building anyway. Like I am the one that's going to be there and I will do so. And it was again one of those things. It was the difference between the ones doing the work and the desk jockey. And well, on paper it says this. I don't care what your paper says. Your paper's not the one doing the research. I am. And so like it was scary and it was really nice at the same time because it's like we got to realize that we do have a little bit more power and a little bit more pull than like our PhDs were ready to give up. Like the people in the power that should have been fighting with us were ready to give up before we were. Because they're like, well, we can't fight them. I'm like, watch me. Like, watch me sit in the mayor's office and go, all right, I'm not leaving until you listen to me.
Yeah.
Like, what else am I going to do? I'm not allowed in the building. Like, it's like one of those things where I'm like what else are we going to do? We might as well. And so it was interesting to see the power shift. And it kind of gave me hope that maybe sometime down the line, we can make a difference in academia. Like, I don't want to be around to be the one to do it. But with as many like strong-minded and strong-voiced people that we have, like, I do see a shift happening. I just don't see it happening soon. And again, it's that mindset of, well, we have to get funded. And that whole process is toxic. And if you can't get funded, you can't do research. If you can't do research, you can't get published. If you don't have the funding, you can't do the cool science. And so it's a loop. And so it's going to be a matter of, which I've seen some of the coolest like resourcefulness just lately with some of the stuff that my lab does. And again, as we were saying, things are so expensive that what I wanted to do, I needed to stretch across 7 labs, being in 7 of them in the US and 1 of them in Sweden, because what needs to be done to prove the point that I wanted to cannot be done just optogenetically or chemogenetically or anything like that.
You're
it has to be all of it.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the questions that you ask and the p-values, and that whatever it is that you were working on, it is more than one question that you need.
Yes.
In this case, it sounds like 7, 8 questions to be answered, and that they all need to have a specific outcome to that answer to prove the point, because it's going to be multifaceted, that it's going to be complex, and even if you don't get the answers you anticipate, you're still going to learn something.
That's
but
a
that
good thing. Yeah.
the question at hand is not just one question.
Essentially, well, it's more of with human, which is funny because it's again, we say juxtaposition so much. Where human research, you can use language. You can ask them, but then you also have to go, okay, are they malingering? Are they lying? What else do we need to look at? Because you can't isolate humans to the point where you can do testing like we do with animals. But with animals, you can't ask them.
Yeah, that you're getting imperfect or incomplete information on one front or the other, and you need to pick your poison.
And so what you think you're training someone to, because what you think you're training a mouse to do, you might not be, because you're training it something completely different, because your brain goes, okay, this is how I learned. But that's not how an animal's going to learn.
Yeah.
And you don't know that. It's kind of like behavioral pharmacology is what my old lab used to do. And so they're like, for example, when policies are written, and yet they don't match up with what we do, like for safety's sake, there was a clause in the thing that was like, if a rat bites you, it's gonna ruin your day. It's gonna do a lot of damage. If a mouse bites you, it's gonna pinch. It's not gonna do that much. But if a rat bites you, I have scars all over my hands. And so there's a clause that was like, if a rat breaks skin 3 times, no matter what the reason, that rat is supposed to be like basically put down, because it's a behavioral issue. And I'm like, we give these animals medicines that have like psychoactive ingredients. That's not fair.
Part of the biting be
they're
data?
Scared. It can be, but that's very hard to do. Just because because we have things in place so that they can't do that. So
a lot of times if it's biting you, it's because, like, for example, I am very, very short. Like, IRL, I am 4'11". Like, I'm short. So I have tiny hands. Rats, when they're healthy, are like potatoes that move. They're very hard if you have very small hands to hold correctly. And so, like, we used to have the many effect, which was I enriched the hell out of my rats. I loved them. I would snuggle them. I would sit there with like my rats in my arms while I did my stats. If you handed me one of mine, I could tell you exactly which one it was just based on how they acted and the weight that they were. Because that is, I spent a lot of time with them. And that way, if I had to do anything that had pharmacology aspects of it, when they got scared, they trusted me enough to not get angry,
Mm-hmm.
which also was considered enrichment. And I got in trouble because they're supposed to be unenriched rats. And I'm like, I hate that. So I'm going to, yeah.
Yeah.
If I had a giant, yeah, if a giant picked me up like a potato, yeah, you'd get scared too. And we would train them. We had snuggle days. We had an entire thing where
Is the
like
technical
mice
term
are,
snuggle days?
yes, yes. We did. We had we literally I had like a snuggle sign up sheet and that's what we did. Minimum 15 minutes a day. They would just get to run around and play with us when we got them because we wanted to habituate them to not only our touch but, you know, the sounds that are in the lab just being handled in general. Yeah, the cuddle puddle IRL essentially, yes. And when we get them, we get them in these like big like it's like 20 of them at a time and they're all in one box and we have to like separate them into we would group house them either way but because they are very social creatures but we would literally like sit there and one of the things that you start with is you just stick your hands in a box of 20 rats and you see what they do. They're terrified of you at first and then they'll start walking near your hand, they'll sniff you and then they'll walk over your hand and then you get to pick them up a little bit, put them down, pick them up, put them
Roll for
down.
animal handling.
It is. It really is. And it was one of the funnest things that I got to do was teach my undergrads how to do it. And, you know, when you have, you know, the typical like, ooh, it's a rat, and you're like, no, 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 no. This is your best friend. Like this is gonna be your best friend. And you're
Yeah.
like, you have to like basically teach that fear out of someone. It's so much fun to do because then all of a sudden you get an undergrad who walked in who's like, you know, hands clutched to their chest when they open the box to all of a sudden they're the
You
ones that are
see that
talking
growth
to
too.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're talking to you while they got a rat running around their shoulders, and you're like, this is what I wanted to see. Like, this is the kind of
Yay.
stuff that I live for. And
Super
like
cool.
it is. It's wonderful. Like I have so many pictures of me. Like you'll see me doing a speech and running my lab meeting with a rat under my arm, and they're just like, you know, like my undergrads used to love that because they would be like, all right, where does Minnie have a rat today? Is it in her pocket? Is it just sitting on her shoulders? Like, because I would wear my hair down and they would just sit on your shoulder, like, you know, wrapped up in your hair. Then like I'm just sitting there talking, I'm writing stuff on the board, and all of a sudden you see a rat like on my arm, and they're like, Minnie, and I'm like, listen, you just needed some extra time today. Like
Yes. What? I'm aware that there is a rat right here. What of it?
like he needed some love and like that was one of the things like you'd see me because I basically worked from 6 o'clock in the morning until about 10 p.m every single day and so it gets lonely when you're in the lab by yourself so I would just sit there with my rats while I'm doing my stats and I'd have you know Minnie's evil genius pet as a rat. Yeah, I love them. I work with mice now and I hate it. I have a side experiment that I'm doing that is going to because we do aggression studies a lot. Because we look right now currently, we look at Alzheimer's and things like that. And so I am one of my side project is looking at frustration aspects and the reward aspects of Alzheimer's and sundowning. So it's like we look at the aggression, and if the aggression changes, if you give them reward beforehand or after, if we frustrate them by giving them reward and taking it away. And one of the things that I wanted to look at was does their aggression level change, even just the regular, like the wild type mice, do their aggression levels change if they're used to the experiment? And again, remember
Mm.
where I told you that rodents smell is a big thing. So if the intruder that we put in there, if that intruder smells like the one that they're used to, the human that they're used to, are they going to be more prone or less prone to aggression because that one smells familiar? Now, what if another human comes in and puts in the other one? Now they smell different and they're an intruder. You know, is that going to make it even more aggressive than prior stuff? Or is just handling them like I do going to be enough? And my first little pilot study, I had 3 of them. We had 2 males and 1 female. So, of course, I named them Garrison, Westy, and Many, the 3 leaders of the Cult of Many. And I
When you
realized,
say you named them this, is this just what you mentally name them, or is there a
oh no, I wrote
file
it down.
that
Yep, I filed it that that was their names. So
have
normally
any
they're
of the
named.
others in the lab ever ask like, "Oh, where did you think of these names?"
Yes, and that was really funny when that I
Or did you tell them
explained
the
that
truth,
to
or did
them.
you just hand
Oh
wave
no,
and
I
make
told them the
something up?
truth. I've because they know that I do streaming stuff, and so I had to tell my
Okay.
PhD. And it was probably the funniest thing that ever happened was I learned very quickly that I don't know how to sex mice as early as I did. Because he comes in, he goes, "You got the three, you got two males, you got one female." I'm like, "Oh, I know what I'm gonna name them." And so I name them. And I named the most grumpy one Garrison because, well,
Hee hee.
he's my grumpy one. And my PhD comes up to me and he had the most serious look on his face and he goes, "You have to separate them." And I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "Many is of breeding age." And I was like, "Do you have any idea what you just fucking said to me?" And he was like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "Jesus Christ, like don't do this to me." And so
At the same time,
I'm
you
like,
set yourself up for that.
I did, and I didn't think that was something that I was ever going to be said to me. And so I run upstairs and I go to move them, and then all of a sudden I realize that I messed up. And I was like, "Oh no." And so Gary and I, obviously we message, we talk all the time, and I send him a Snapchat and I was like, "I messed up." And he goes, "What do you mean you messed up?" And then I stick my hand under Garrison and I was like, "I have to
Oh,
separate her. Garrison is now of breeding age." And he was like, "What?" And I was
oops.
like, "I messed up." And he was like, "Well, you can just change the names." I was like, "Absolutely not.
No,
Garrison
it's
is my
done.
sweet little
It's on
girl."
file.
Like, I love her. And oh, it was so good. And like I ended up like, rats are little dickheads. They really are. Like they're grumpy all the time. I mean, it's just a natural evolution of things. They have to be. And so I had my little three that I ended up sitting with for like hours one time just to habituate them to me. And they were the sweetest. I have so many little videos of them. I love them. I taught them little games and like we had a lot of fun. And so she ended up becoming like the little cuddle bug where it was like because she was housed by herself, I would give her extra attention. And I would always just send like Gary little videos. I was like, "Look, Gary saw," or I was like, "Look at Gary said our little sweet baby girl." He's like, "Stop being like this." I was like, "I love her so much though." Like she's beautiful and she's great. And like we ended up just for them, I never actually got to do any of the aggression stuff with them. We just basically my PhD was like, "You can't make them nice." And I was like, "People have mice as pets. What do you mean?" Like, of course I can. I'm a behaviorist. Watch me. And so we ended up, I was like, in 2 hours, I had these things like pet trained essentially.
There you
I was
go.
like, because you can, again, one, don't tell me I can't do anything. Two, I'm a
Yeah.
behaviorist. It's what we do.
Yeah, that's
And
literally your area.
and so like we now know that later down the line, if I get the extra time, which we know I won't, that's something that we can do now. And it's just like these little side projects where we're like, will that ever get funded? Probably not. But now I know I can do it.
Mm.
And I don't know, I love that aspect of my job where it's like learning to ask the question, learning like what you can and can't do without language is it's one of the only times that I get to use creativity in my field is experimental design, which is why VTubing is so much fun for me, is because this is my creative outlet. But I get to do that once every like 7 months, maybe, is be creative in my job.
Yeah,
Everything else is like super
it's
technical.
the anomaly.
Mm-hmm. But man, when you got to think outside the box, it's hard. It's very, very hard.
Yeah, and especially because the type of thinking, like you said, it is supposed to be outside the box. You were supposed to think, all right, what has not been suggested before? What
Mm-hmm.
has not been attempted before? And it's very difficult because one, a lot of things have already been thought of, a lot of things have already been tried, and it is asking the question, what is a small subset of possible questions? What is the subset of possible questions that are going to be relevant? And then,
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason a question hasn't been asked is because it's probably not an obvious question to ask in the first place.
Or
So
answer.
or answer. So you're trying to push yourself mentally into a niche within an unnatural niche.
And then finding an ethics board.
That too.
Because Yeah, and which sounds really silly because ethics boards are there for a reason, obviously. They're
Yeah,
put in place for a reason.
ethics are
But
good. Ethics should be there.
you have to convince an ethics board that there's a reason you're not doing the normal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like where there's a lab around us that does pain studies, and they have found a method that is actually so much more humane than what is used, and it's just as efficient, and they've shown that. But the ethics board is like, but we already have this, and they're like, but this is actually worse. Our
Life is
current
good,
standard is
but it can be
terrible.
better.
Yeah, they're like, our current standard is terrible, and this is why. And right now, they're having to put a halt on things, and they have for the last 6 months because they're fighting with the ethics board, going, but we already have this paradigm. And they're like, we don't care. We're trying to explain to you why this one's better. And they're like, yeah, but no one else uses it. And they're like, yeah, it's new.
Because they
We're
don't know
trying to
about it yet.
explain exactly. And it's like that back and forth, and it's just like, oh my God, please, like, you have to listen. And it's like, does it matter? There's so many things where it like feels like it doesn't matter what we hand them. They're like, but it's already in place. It's like, we get it. You don't want to do the paperwork. Like, I'll do it for you. Just listen to me. And it's again, it's so many. That's another reason why I don't like academia, is because there's so many like obstacles, and the limitation of time is always there because your students are going to be coming and going, and you don't want to keep them around. You know that they want to graduate.
Yeah, that
Like
they are
5 years
supposed
is
to.
a long time, but it's
Yeah.
also not long enough for research.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing that, like you said, science takes a long time, and that these experiments can take anywhere from months to years, especially if they're
Mhm.
multifaceted, and that eventually folks should be able to spread their wings and go into whatever areas. But it's, along the way, you're fighting anything from ethics board to funding to just being able to get the pieces for your approved project and experiment, and then being able to actually see it through, and that it's in some ways very fast, in some ways incredibly
Mhm.
slow, and just the sort of paradox and conflict of it all ends up creating a lot of challenges. In some ways, it can create really cool things, but
Mhm.
it's not easy. There's a reason that it is so difficult, and that why it is such a specific area for just any given study.
Yeah.
Also, I just realized I missed a couple follows. Zeta Omega 1, Bay Ray Games, and Dummy Dorko. That's a fun name. Thank you so much for the follows.
It's a
So,
great name.
you've mentioned several times you do not want to stay in academia. You do not enjoy it. You think that it's generally toxic, and that you want to eventually go into industry. Now, with a PhD in neuroscience, with a focus on circadian rhythms and addiction specifically,
Yes.
where in industry does that fit? That there's a couple different things that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of, the medical field, anything from pharmaceuticals to potential therapeutic answers.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, is what is it that you hope to do in industry if you were to have your choice based on really any opportunity that's available today, or even one if you could pioneer it?
If I had my own, like in the ideal world, I would have my own lab and be able to work with pharmaceutical companies. Um, One of my biggest things, and this is like, I will fight anyone on this. One of the biggest things that I hope to do at some point is I would love to see the end of this war on drugs. Um, because again, addiction is where my main focus is. Like the circadian aspect is really cool. It's just what my lab does. And so I had to find a way to put what I want to do in with what my lab does. And like I'm working with another lab thankfully in my school that does a lot of really cool addiction stuff as well. And working with multiple labs at a time, being able to show in all these different ways, whether it's like the pathways that we're looking at, whether it's looking at pathology of certain, like because we are under the, again, it's not even an assumption, it's just a fact that addiction is a disease or a disorder. It is overactivation of certain pathways, and we're trying to find actual pathology of it currently to be able to say this is something diagnosable. And that way, because if you think about it, which is something that a lot of people don't do, and one of the things that I wanted to tackle and we're having the hardest time figuring it out, is that there's an entire subset of psychology called applied behavioral analysis, or ABA psychology, that is tailored to helping people who have addictive behaviors, whether that is people who like self-injurious behavior, where it's like whether they're people that are verbal or not, you need to stop them from doing these behaviors because they're hurting themselves, or any bad quote unquote problem behavior or bad behavior. We will call those target behaviors because there's no behavior that's inherently good or bad. It's just a behavior. It is a way that someone acts. And so there are behaviors that can be addictive and that people will show relapse of these behaviors before a substance is even introduced. And so saying that the problem with addiction is these substances is just fundamentally wrong. And so ideally anything that I do, whether it is working the actual science behind it, whether it's working the technical things of it, whether it is being able to sit here and fight with legislation about it, my goal at the end of the day, however long it may take, is to just get rid of the legislation that is surrounding anything criminal about the war on drugs, because it is not a criminal problem, it is a medical problem. And there are so many different facets that I could go into for that, whether it's the active, like being the active one that is dealing with the lawyers, that gets to be that conduit of, I can make this English for you. I can explain to this or explain the research in English to you so that you can change it to legalese, or you can deal with the people that I don't want to deal with, or I can be the one doing that research, or I can be the one that is, in charge of the lab making everyone else do it, or I can be the project manager that is setting all these labs up together. Any of these things I would be more than happy to do.
You are dealing with two of the most complex languages ever conceived, being scientific analysis and law.
Yep.
And you are trying to not only be able to communicate in both languages, but translate between the two languages, which are very frequently at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm. I don't do anything
I say this with the
easy.
utmost. I say this with the utmost sincerity. Good luck.
Yes. And I mean, we've already there's, everybody always talks about like jokes about like the things that you see in movies where you'll get, certain government agencies or something like that will send you essentially a cease and desist because it doesn't work for them. We've gotten things like that before. And it does really happen where,
And
like you were saying early, you make enemies, and you do very, very quickly when you talk about stuff like this. And I don't know, I'm always ready to throw hands. So I am the person to be on the forefront of this, and I will gladly do it.
and it's such a difficult thing because, for the most part, you want to assume that 99, 90, 95 or more percent of people have good intentions and want to do good, and it's just a difference of sort of context,
Mhm.
learnings, historical data in its own way, sort of like we were talking about with tenured professors and CEOs, and what people think to be good and what people think to be the right way to bring about good and positive change in the world.
Mhm.
That is where the difference is, and that you hope, ideally, that at the end of the day, the crux of it all comes down to communication and being able to explain why something is good, because at the end of the day you hope that people do
Mhm.
have that shared positive goal. Even so, it's very difficult, even if you are assuming the best of people and their intentions. uh,
Mhm.
there's always going to be a couple folks with less than good intentions, but I genuinely believe that for the most part, people want to do good, and it's just the how, the why, the
Yeah.
knowledge, the context that varies. And even so, it is just fraught with pitfalls and, like you
Yeah.
said, roadblocks along the way. And it's uh, what is that if not, frankly, the history of law and
Yeah.
society itself, of just how do we get to good and how do we work together to get there? And it's tough. It is
Yeah.
so tough. And you look at stuff like, most law, most historical precedent is all right, based on, like we were talking about, evolving knowledge over time. And
Mhm.
what we knew at the time was what we genuinely believed at that time to be the best answer and what we thought was right and good. And it's just as it becomes standardized and folks become acclimated to it, the idea of moving away from such a system feels
Yeah.
bad, of just, all right, isn't this actually going to cause harm? And trying to find the middle ground or something to really break that mental shackle of why what we thought to be right is in fact not right,
Yeah.
and it can be a painful and difficult process.
And it's
Um,
expensive.
that too, very expensive.
Like not even just the research, like a lot of implications when like even with anything when it comes to science is what happens now. And
Yeah.
like you had said, we like to think that things are good, and it's a disconnect that you have to do when you do research. You have to understand that you are the objective. You're like literally you are the objective facts. That's all you're trying to find. And what people do with the research after you do it, you have to understand that you are not responsible for, which can be
Hmm.
very scary.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where statistics tell a story, but statistics can also be skewed to tell the story you don't want to, or used in a way that it'll make it look the opposite, or like the straw man fallacies and things like that, where you're like, well, this one point of data says this, and you're like, okay, but I have like 500 others that don't. And there's really no laws when it comes to how statistics are used in politics. And because how can you? Because you
Yeah.
can be wrong in reading your own statistics, and that's why you have all these double checks and things of that nature. And it's it's a scary thought where it's like, what could this
What could it
information
be
be
twisted
used for?
into?
Yeah. And it's there on at the base of it, there are people that are in charge, and people are the ones that are handling everything that you do. And there is always like there's corruption and everything, and the subjective good or bad, where it's one of those like what I would love to see is the end of the war on drugs. But again, there's medical on that. There's tons and tons of medical. There is how do we switch from what we're doing to what sounds like an open system without there being complete chaos? What
Yeah. And
happens when, how do we deal with the people who are already serving time for something that we have now found is now shouldn't be, considered criminal? Do we
mhm,
magically let everybody out? How do we now there's the
there's a lot of
economy
ripple
behind,
effects.
yeah, putting people back in society, because we don't even want to talk about the prison pipeline when it comes to that kind of stuff. But there's so much now, the pharmaceutical, economical side of it. Well, what about all these other things that we're now paying for? What about treatments? How do we do this kind of stuff? And it's these are the things that when we do the science, we will have politicians run in our face and be like, yeah, but if you say this, look at all the stuff that we have to deal with. And I'm like, that's a you problem, not me,
Yeah.
buddy. Like,
Yeah. That's we recognize that this will happen, but ultimately
hmm
isn't that good, and it's good
yeah.
usually, but it's also again difficult, has its own red tape, has its own costs, has its own
hmm
risks, and just it, generally speaking, certain substances should not be handled by everyone. It should have a
Right.
degree of oversight that
hmm
you're certainly not like very few people are suggesting, all right, let's put every type of, different substance, have it be super available over the counter, no
hmm
oversight whatsoever. That's silly. That's dangerous.
Well,
And it's
even over
just
the counter, there's oversight, because
exactly,
that's
yeah.
going to be better than, say, like the reason that fentanyl is a big thing right now is because um other opioids became much harder to get. And so there had to be an answer to that,
Hmm.
that was unregulated. And that's why fentanyl is so scary, is because it's completely unregulated. Whereas, opioids are not. There you know what you're getting when you're saying this is the dose. But if it's over the counter and you say this is the dose, at least you still know this is the
Yeah,
dose
that you
and
yeah,
not what is this laced with.
and there's, you know, eh, it's so
It's a
complex,
huge, yeah, I was gonna say it's
so
a big
complex,
one.
and eh, it's the type of thing that even if you even if we get to the point where we are able to, make significant progress on ending the war on drugs and saying, all right, this is not the answer, then there's the follow-up question of, all right, what is the answer? And
What do we
that in and
do?
of itself,
Yeah.
that's still its own complex sets of things that knowing, with statistics, all right, we know that this isn't the answer. That's certainly valuable.
Mhm.
That's incredibly valuable.
Yes.
And then finding what is the answer, or at least, what is the next best answer that we have that we can find and prove to make that new standard that hopefully we'll have to buck that after some amount of time.
Mhm.
It's just that is the cycle of science.
And the fun thing about science, and also one of the frustrating things, is that the question that you ask, you may not be alive to see the answer. And that's
Hmm.
okay. But a lot of people don't like to accept that. They're like, but I have to be the one to figure out the answer, which again slows it down because they don't want to see other people get the answer before them.
Yeah,
Whereas
and
I'm like, I don't care, man. Like, I think I hate when you have to pay for a paper. Like, I actually have an entire section in my Discord that's called Secret Scholar. Um, because again, on stream, I'm an absolute idiot, but on the side, obviously, like if you challenge my credentials, I will run you into the dirt. But I also have like that section that is literally called non-toxic academia, where if you need a paper, if you need anything, I have the ability to get that for you. I will not allow you to be paywalled. Like anything that you need, I have almost open access to everything because of my position, and I will get it for you. Because I hate the paywall aspect of education. Science should be open and free, which is also scary because as someone who has been doing this for years, I one of the biggest frustrations that I get is when someone who is like an armchair academic thinks they have a PhD because they read something on Google, or I'm like, I've been doing this for like 10 years now and I have no idea what it's talking about. How do you suddenly know? That is scary when you think about opening up information that is not almost regulated, where you're like, okay, you have now just the raw data and the raw science, and you can make your own conclusions. And when you give stuff like that to, essentially layman terms, if it's not in layman terms and you just open that up to everybody, um, then you
misinformation,
have,
misconception.
yes, it's more misconception than misinformation because people don't know how to translate a lot of this
Yeah,
stuff.
it's
Like
more
there's entire
misconception
courses.
becomes misinformation.
Yes, and there's entire courses on how to read scientific papers so that you're like, okay, if they're saying this, what does that actually mean? And when you open up, because again, science is its own language. Every single field has its own jargon, which is just obnoxious and a half. Because like, my God, you're trying to get like your background information on research, and you're like, I know what I want to ask, but what did they call it? Like, what if I'm gonna, if you look up something, you're like, oh, no one's ever done this, and then you find out later down the line after you're 2 years into your project that someone did it, they just called it
They
something
just call it
else.
something different.
Awful, awful. But again, it's because everything is behind a paywall. That if I tell my professor that I'm like, dude, I found this really cool paper, but it's like $30 to get it, and he's like, yeah, well, all right, find another one. Like, that shouldn't be a thing. And I also don't believe that it should be like, oh, just because you're in academia, you get open resources so other people don't. No, I think it should be open, like just in general. And I also
Yeah.
understand that can be scary because now you're gonna give it to people who
At
don't
that
want to
point,
sit down
it
and
becomes a
like,
thing of education. And just,
yes,
I believe that statistics should be a required course in high schools. That
yes,
not just how to calculate statistics and the concept of p-values and all that, because I think that it makes you a better question asker and
yes,
analytical thinker, just completely regardless of the mathematics and number crunch, but just mentally how to think and ask and problem solve, but also how to read numbers.
mhm,
That's a big thing. Hand in hand, you said there's entire courses on how to read scientific papers. Just making sure that we have information literacy in terms of how to read a graph, how to notice. All right,
yes,
one of the biggest things that you see in a lot of places is folks will take a graph and they will take a chunk of it. And what you can do is you do this little thing where you put a squiggly line at the
mhm,
start of an axis and
mhm,
that you just skip 0 to 10,000. And then the rest of it
yep,
is in like 100 increments. And you can make a tiny little portion of a graph that has in full context just these little itty bitty bumps. If you zoom in
mhm,
real far, you can make it look like it's this catastrophic change in data when in fact it's not. And if you just glance at it visually, you will have the reaction of, oh, wow, something is big and changing. If you don't know to look and always glance at the start of the axis and like, is there a broken bent line here? Where is the scale? Where is it starting? Something like that. Or just as simple as understanding the difference in how questions are asked for respondents, thinking
yes,
to ask what were the options of this question and
mhm,
what is the historical percentage. All right, if 75% of people think this thing, okay, uh 10 years ago did people think more or less? Or
mhm,
if you say, all right, the number of the unemployment number has gone up or down, or the interest rate has gone up or down compared to what, compared to when.
Yeah.
And just these fundamental questions of how to read and understand data that is already being collected, because there is so much value in that for uh, helping reduce misconception. And like we said, just misconception, I believe, leads to misinformation, because if you
Mm.
read a thing and you misunderstand it and you tell others because you think that that is right because you read it and you understood it to be a thing and you're trying to be helpful and inform others. But at that point, you are providing misinformation, even if unintentionally. And,
Yeah.
there's certainly a difference between unintentional and intentional distribution of misinformation, but it's misinformation all the same. And if you can help reduce the amount of accidental misinformation, that
Yes.
is a lot of misinformation out there. I try to be a optimist, and I think that more than half of misinformation out there is the perpetuation of misconception and
Mhm.
accidental. Um, and if we can help people understand how to read numbers, how to read graphs, how to read papers, that it will go a long way in just ripple effects for society in general and information consumption. That's a huge thing.
Oh yeah, very much so. I completely agree with that. And one of the other fun things that, again, because I've taken like 2 of these courses already, is not taking results at face value. If a result says, we found out that this set of neurons does this thing, the other question you have to ask is, okay, but just because you saw that this happened when you did this thing or when the animal did this thing, what else could be the cause?
Mm-hmm.
Not just saying, you can't definitely say, again, it's the causation kind of thing
Correlation
where
does
it's
not
like,
equal causation.
yes.
That is when I took high school statistics, that
Yep.
my teacher would repeat more than anything else. She would make a point of putting the basically effectively that question on pretty much every test. That
Yes.
somewhere in there that it she would put a variation of, the result was this. Does this mean that such and such? And the answer is
Mhm.
no, because
No.
correlation does not equal causation. That it would just be, a free 1 or 2 points, but it would always be there. She would always drive that home because it is such
Yeah.
a simple but fundamental understanding of statistics.
And it's the one of the fun things is that we get to do in this level of like research is basically the difference between causation and correlation is these things happen at the same. Causation is direction. Which one came first or which
Hmm.
one is the driving factor? And that's the different questions that you have to answer is, okay, if I've seen this correlation, now which directions do I go about it to see where that came from? And that's, again, one of the most fun things that I do in my job is we're like, oh, we saw this cool correlation. Now we know where to start. It's like getting that correlation, which everybody else would have been like, oh, that's the end. Like, this is it. We found this. No, we haven't. Now we know where to start. I killed
Hi, Kill. Welcome on in. Thank you for the follow. That if you ever want some fun statistical things, just put in a search engine silly correlation graphs. I've done this just now.
Oh.
We have divorce rates in Maine do correlate with per capita consumption of margarine in the broader U.S. The age of Miss America correlates with murders by steam, hot vapors, and hot objects. Let's see here. Where are some other fun ones? We do.
And it's so funny
Internet
because those
Explorer
sound
versus
super
murder
silly.
rate. Yeah,
And-
just honeybee colonies versus marriage rates in Vermont.
Like I love those kind of things because we actually bring those things up all the time. Like whenever someone will be like, yeah, but this paper said this, we'll bring up one of those correlations and be like, yeah, but this and this also correlate. And they're like, oh my God. And like they'll get really mad. But if you know the brain well enough, a lot of times these correlations that people make no sense.
No.
But if you don't know the basis of it, it sounds really great. And
Well, this
like
is fun.
it's so much fun.
Per capita cheese consumption correlates with the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets.
No, I could see the correlation on that one. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just that there's statistics and science is fraught with pitfalls. And there's a lot of weird stuff, and it's just you need to be really, really, really careful. But at the same time, that's why doing this stuff is so important, because we want to learn, we want to figure out these things. And we've sort of veered off course of your initial area of study and going back to your hope to work in pharmaceuticals and industry. I guess to the layman, what would be the focus on that work that you'd mentioned? First off, working with legislation to help reduce end war on drugs, but
Mhm.
do you have a dream product, a dream pharmaceutical of something that you, or even just uh, a medical or analytical process that you would hope to either pioneer or see developed?
Probably ways to like, because again, I really do like the applied side of things. If I could go into the medical treatment side of things, I would be very happy. And like pioneering ways to make it accessible to everyone.
Mm,
Like, even if I have to deal with the legislation and the economic side of things, I would love to be able to work with a team that is able to find ways to make it work so that, once the science comes out, we can be like, okay, it's not only here's just the science, now it's a you problem, where we can say, this is the science, here's a solution. And I would love to be on that solution team.
mm.
Because
I
again,
usually,
I know how to talk the science. And I mean, one of the things that like why I have that little secret section is I will occasionally do talks to my community. Like I have to do, say, a presentation, and I will be like, all right, if anybody wants to hang around, I will do this presentation and I want you to ask questions. If you start to glaze over because you don't understand, if I can make it so that pretty much someone who is not in my field and doesn't have my level of education can understand what I'm saying, that's my goal.
yeah, that's really convenient and fun because it lets you have literally a test audience there, and that you
Mhm.
have folks who aren't going to be those experts to bounce things off of, which you're not necessarily going to have at your own lab because, well, they're at your lab for a reason.
Yeah, it's basically I forget what I like don't know. Like when I
Yeah,
started, I
that's
don't
a
remember
huge
what I
thing.
didn't know. And so being able to do that and it's one of the coolest things that I think has ever come out of my community. Like cuz the first time I did it, I was like no one's going to want to be here and there were like 20 people. The next time I did it, I was like no one's going to want to be here cuz it's like a huge thing. And there were like 50 people that were there and it was supposed to be a 45-minute talk and we were all sitting there and everybody's asking me questions for 5 hours.
That's so cool.
And I was
W-
like, I
Would you
love
consider doing
this.
that as part of your normal streams, or do you think that just
Not as
a
my normal streams, no. And
mm,
the reason is it's a very controlled environment. Again, I'm a
fair,
scientist.
very
Controlled
fair?
environment makes me happy.
Mm,
It is being able to know, and again, it being the controlled environment that it is my community and they know how I do things. You're not going to have someone who rolls up in the middle of
you're
it and
not
goes,
going to have
yeah,
the
but I heard
randos.
a thing and I'm
Oh
going to
yeah,
lose my shit. Like,
very fair, very fair.
so the happy controlled environment where it's like if I can get on it like heated on a topic and it's in a controlled environment with just people that I am comfortable with, that's much different than having an open forum where like I get thrown in front of like speaking is never an issue with me. I think the biggest crowd that I have talked to just and that was with very minimal prep. I got told like an hour before, hey, your professor's supposed to do this thing, he's not here, someone in your lab has to take over. I'm like, sure, whatever, I'll do it. What crowd am I looking at? They're like, oh, like 8 or 900. And I'm like, oh, fuck, all right, that's cool, I guess. And then, come to
Eh,
find out it was closer to 2000. And I'm like, well,
oh joy,
once you get past like 50 people, it all becomes the same.
that's true.
Like,
And
I can't
yeah,
register how many people are there. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh man, like 2,200 were in there. I'm like, jeez, okay, cool, I guess.
hey, if you're
And
being told that, that means that the presentation's over, so you don't need to worry about it anymore. It's already
yeah,
done.
yeah. And then, again, I get like thrown into those situations all the time, so I'm very used to it. And like I'm also I thankfully seasoned in the having someone during like Q&A just sit there and roast everything I've ever done. Like and again, I am one of those people where I'm like, talk to me after, and they're like, well, no. It's like, no, 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 please. Like, I agree with your points, and I want to know how to make my stuff better. And people don't know how to do like how to deal with that. It's so funny because they want to be the one that's like, haha, I shut this person down. And I'm like, then tell me how to fix it. No, what? And I'm like, just come
Yeah,
tell
and
me
just
how to fix
I
it.
like this conversation. We do not have
Hmm.
time. I want to be able to get to others, but I want to have
Yeah.
this conversation.
And that's one of the reasons why I know that a lot of people will go into situations, especially ones that they care about a ton, and they don't want the solution, they just want to yell. And that's why I would love
Mm,
to make sure that I am part of that solution team, is because, again, I know people are angry about this and people get very, very passionate about like addiction and how it should be dealt with, but people don't really know how it should be dealt with. So if I can get a scientific team behind these are good solutions, that would be ideal for me.
mhm. Sure, thank you for the follow. There I'm I'm really enjoying this conversation because, like I said, this is episode 92 of Vtuber Talk. I very seldom get to talk any type of academia, and certainly
Mhm.
not this specific type. So this is a super fun one, but I do want to let us discuss a couple other things. But
Yeah.
suffice to say, we could just talk about this for hours and hours. And
Yes.
part of the reason that I do want us to move on a little bit is because we're on a time limit. Because after this, you're playing one of your weekly D&D sessions,
I am.
and I guess there's a lot to talk about for D&D. One, just it is a good, deep subject. It's one that I do get to talk with guests a fair bit with, but it's always so unique and different. Everyone's experience, everyone's style, and that's part of what makes tabletop RPGs so cool. But also, it's a bit of a current issue
Mhm.
for other reasons. So, starting sort of at the top, what was your introduction to TTRPGs, and do you find that you have a style as a player?
Ooh. Oh, that's actually a really good one. So, I think I started way back in the day with Savage Worlds.
I'll admit I haven't
Which
heard of that one.
really, okay, so the most notable thing about Savage Worlds is explosive dice. If you roll, say you're rolling a d6, you roll a 6, you get to roll it again. You keep rolling sixes, you keep rolling.
Oh.
Yeah. We ended a level 19 campaign because of that. And that was my introduction where I was like, oh my God, like it doesn't matter. We have been going on this for like 2.5 years, and we ended that because my character mouthed off to a level 2 dwarf. And I was like, this is awesome. And this is where I want to do the creative side. And then my style, like I went from that to we did Pathfinder, which was basically D&D 3.75, and then I went back into D&D 3 and then 4, and now I'm doing 5, and we have like everything we've ever done except for one Pathfinder campaign has always been homebrew. And that was
Mm,
because our DM was completely new, and he's like, "Oh, let's do Rise of the Rune Lords." And so right now ours is a homebrew campaign, and I absolutely love it, but up until this campaign, I have always been the face of the party. So I'm the one that's leading things. I'm the one going in the directions, and I'm the big, strong, whatever. And I usually do tanky stuff, which is really fun for me because in like MMOs, you'll see me be the healer because I like to make sure that your life is in my hands and that's it. Um, but this is the first campaign that I did the complete opposite. My VTuber is actually based off of my current D&D character, which is Many. He is a little kobold. He is 2.5 feet tall. We have literally in our party a 26-foot lamia. We have a turtle. We have an Aarakocra. We have a tabaxi. It is basically a furry party. Um, and we have a Loxodon as well. And so Many being the smallest little thing that he is and a wild magic sorcerer, he is essentially a toddler with an arsenal. And so instead of being the one that's writing down all the details and making sure all this stuff, I literally will not pay attention. Like because I have the ability to do so, I record all of our sessions so that later I can listen to them like a podcast while I'm working so that I can pick
mm,
up on the information that I wasn't listening to because I want to make stupid rash decisions. I will play him so in character. He was chaotic neutral for a while, but it turns out that if you, while maintaining eye contact, slit the throat of a party member,
that
you
will
can't
cause an
consider
alignment
yourself.
shift.
Yeah, you're not allowed to call yourself neutral anymore. So
It's
he is
just a
chaotic
little
evil.
bit of murder.
It's just, I mean, listen, in my defense, I asked her nicely for the dagger and she wouldn't give it to me, so I just had to take matters into my own hand. But he's absolutely like just a little shit gremlin. And like, I mean, for example, we were sitting in the barracks after getting arrested because I accidentally killed 17 people. Long story. Wild magic is a trip. It's so much fun. And like just being like again, literally I play him like a toddler. Like Maya, our tank who he was running around with, got, you know, separated, and she was like, no, Minnie, you have to stay here. And so he cast greater invis on himself to walk 2 feet and sit in the corner just to cause a rouse out of everybody. Like, I will waste level 4 spells just to upset people.
Just
And
to
it's great. It causes, like, I love to be the internal conflict in the party because I like
you are
when
the
the
agent of
party members.
chaos.
I am. And I would have done that before, like, as when I was the face of the party, but with like, it should be expected with many, but because so many things are always happening, when he pops up with something, people are like, Minnie, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, like, you just kind of giggle. And like, he was a joke character at first, which is always the ones you fall in love with.
Oh yeah,
He
everything
was,
starts as a joke and then it just keeps going and keeps going, and then
yeah,
you realize, oh wait, this is a thing now.
I love him and I will kill everyone in this party if anything happens to him. Yes. Because like we were just doing you know, the beyond we won't talk about right now, that thing. And we did the random name generator because it wouldn't let me move without a name. And I'm like, I was gonna name him after I made him. And the name rolled on many, and I was like, of all things, I was like, whatever, we'll just leave that there. And then we did the little randomized background thing where it's like you found a book and now you hear all these voices, and I was like, that's funny, it kind of goes with the name.
Yeah,
And then
multiple, many, okay.
yeah, and I was like, all right, I see where this is going. And then he's haunted and it's got like all this other stuff. And then it was literally just an introduction to a character just to throw him in the party because of where the party was at the time, because I ended up having to finish my master's thesis, and so I couldn't start with everybody else. So I rolled in 6 months later when they were stuck on this island. So I was like, well, how else are we going to introduce something? I either have to have a lizard man or a kobold. And I was like, let's go with the kobold. And then I just fell in love with him because of how much fun it was to play him and still have his own story.
That's
And
It's so cool because it's not only, all right, you made this character, fell in love with them when you didn't expect to, and that it has become a very central part of you in that it transcended the campaign and has now become you with your content.
yeah,
But the whole fact that the name itself, the base concept and identity, is a RNG result.
yep,
That's
absolutely.
incredible.
And it's so fun too because I am like notebooks deep in lore that we have written for Vtuber Many. And when she broke off, basically that throat slitting that we were talking about is where I have Vtuber Many and D&D Many break off. And my rice ball model, which is my dumb little rice ball, and I love him, like in my lore, is actually D&D Many manifesting in this world because he has the ability to take over the many. And so he's basically looking for a way out if anything goes wrong in the D&D world, which goes wrong all the time because he dies constantly. If anything goes wrong, he has the option to float into the next world that or the next version of himself that he thinks is better. And so D&D, that's why you never see Rice Ball and Many in the same room, is because he doesn't want to be seen. And so VTuber Many doesn't know that D&D or that Rice Ball exists. So when people are talking about like, yeah, that little shark version of you, I'm always like, what are you talking about? What do you mean?
What do you mean?
You know, yeah, and it's so much fun. Like my birthday when I introduced him, because I was like, you know, we hyped it up that I had a brand new model, and he was my original PNG. So when I hyped everybody up about the brand new model, I come out with my PNG is now a model. And we had the completely in character. We had 2 days of it where Many was interviewing all of the people that went to Many's birthday party. And so he was trying to figure out like, okay, is this one strong enough kind of thing that I can do it? And the whole point of it was to get hype before my V2 debut, because I was like telling, like when I talk to people, I was like, be completely in character. So it's what your character knows about Many. which is
Mhm.
true for your person, but it may not actually be the truth of many. So we just started rumors when it comes to lore, and people like asking questions like, well, so and so said this person, but that doesn't make any sense because this person said this. And like we it just got to be like so like fun and deep, and
I don't know if
a
I've ever
lot of
heard of rumor mill lore for VTubers.
oh, it's so fun though.
No, it's like I've never heard of it before, but it's brilliant.
Well, if you
That's
think
so
about it,
fun.
you have that anyway because the like the odds of having someone show up every time you're talking about your lore are so
Yeah.
far and few between that your lore is going to be rumor anyway until like say you do a big debut where you talk about your lore. And I think while I love doing lore dumps, and I will do one for my V2 because that's like our whole point of the lore video that I've been working on, um at the same time I love to drop hints every single time that I go fully in character. If you ever see me with Garrison instead of Gary, we are immediately fully in character every single time. And we'll drop lore hints with what's the lore between those two. Anytime that I'm with Westy on a stream where we're actually being in character, it's very hard for us to do that. We cannot stay in character. We're always laughing about stuff. We will drop hints. The lore with Westy and Many accidentally corresponded so well with each other that we were like, we're keeping it. Like Westy, and this was even before I met Westy. Like he has the whole book thing where if you burn the book, that's where like Big Nightmare Westy comes from. Many actually had that book in the original like randomization of rolling things. We're like, oh, he burns the book. All of a sudden, you know, it comes back to him, and we find out that he's able to read and understand the book, but he can't actually read. Again, works well with him being, or with both like D&D Many and VTuber Many being woven into Westy's lore almost perfectly.
Now, speaking
And
of your, sorry,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you're talking about, your different models, V2 coming up and all this. If memory serves, you have made and rigged all of your models, correct? Or at least
Yes.
all of your primary ones.
Yes.
Where the hell did you find the time to learn that amidst all of the other research? And when did that happen? When did that have a chance to happen?
I don't sleep.
I know, but you barely sleep as is and are already super busy. I guess, did you just happen to have the slightest of lulls and free time?
So what ended up happening was when I went to do my first model, I ended up not like I didn't have the money to do anything, and I was like, oh, I'll just do the PNG stuff. And so, well, I actually started with PNG reactives, which again was like the little rice ball. I didn't know I was a VTuber for like 2 months.
Oh, oops.
I just was like, oh, cool, like Discord has these reactive things now. I'll make it so his mouth opens and closes. And someone's like, yeah, Minnie, you're a VTuber. I'm like, I'm a what?
What did you just call me?
Yeah, I was like, what do you mean a VTuber? And so I ended up like, oh, wait, what does that mean? And I looked into it and I was like, oh my God, you can make your models move. And so I made the first iteration of this model, and I was actually going to pay someone to rig it because I ended up just like, I used to do commissions on my, like on the side as well when I had the time. And so between the start of my PhD and the end of my master's, I had like 2 months. And so I made the model and I sent it off to somebody who literally took 6 months and then sends me a message and goes, oh my God, I forgot. I thought I rigged yours already.
Oh, no.
And I was like, don't even worry about it. Like, because I didn't even ask for a refund because I was like, I know that if I ask for a refund, you're going to be like, no, it's done. And you're going to throw some crap together and give it to me. So I was like, whatever, just keep the money. I'll just do it on my own. And so I figured out how to do it in like a few months. And it was very like the difference between this model, because this is my 1.5. The difference between this model and the first one is like, you can see obviously how much I move. The other one had no body movement at all. It was literally just the head, and it was just like, you could barely move the head back and forth, like that kind of thing. There was like no physics in the hair. And I learned how to do it poorly, but I learned how to do it. And then the obsession, because again, if I put my name on it, it's going to be the best I can do. And
Hmm.
so then learning, oh my God, I can do so much more from
Yeah.
this. And then that's where 1.5 showed up. And I gaslit everybody about that one. Because I just dropped this model and then everybody's like, oh my God, it's your new model. I'm like, no, it's the same one until people stop asking and just accepted this model.
Yeah. This has always been me. What are you talking about?
Which works really well in the VTuber or the V2 lore because you're gonna find out secret. This
Reasons.
isn't many. This isn't many. I found out that I can make clones in my D and that's the other thing that's really fun is stuff that happens in our D&D campaign. I'm like, oh, but I can apply that to VTuber many.
That's a great plot point.
It's so cool. And so that's again a lot of the evolution of version 2. It like the amount of snakes and stuff like that that are on version 2 come from D&D many, but D&D many doesn't have his arms. She will. Because I have learned that it's very hard to remember the in character stuff when I'm like holding, I'm talking about holding a controller and people will be like, ah ha ha, how do you hold it with snakes? And I'm like, very carefully, shut up, I forgot about that.
Mm,
You know? And like it's like a lot of the changes are based on how easy it is to stay in the character versus like, oh, can I make this into a model? And like I've learned very quickly that things are like my oh god, I've made a nightmare for myself and anybody that
oops.
ever wants to draw her. But I also one of the reasons like I for example changed my color palette for version 2 is because as you learned finding a chroma key for this character is impossible because I
That's-
have
Yep. You have just
doesn't
enough
look like it,
different
but I have
colors.
just enough of everything.
I think I actually got it pretty good with this one. I'm really pleased with how this turned out right now. That I had to mess with some of the similarity slides just a little
Mhm.
bit, and that this isn't the preset magenta background that you
Mhm.
gave me a particular hex code to use, but I think it actually came out pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Also,
And then
Anton
sometimes I
4843,
turn.
thank you for the follow.
Welcome in, welcome in. Yeah, sometimes when I turn on like chroma key, you'll see like my eye disappear or part of my crystal because it changes color when I move. Like I learned very quickly that I'm like, as fun and easy it is to have her on my stream, as someone who started doing nothing but collabs, I should probably make this easier for people.
Mouse Sensei, thank you for the follow. And you mentioned that to me when we spoke the other day that you started off doing a whole bunch of collabs and
Mhm.
then sort of had a 180 where for a long time you just didn't do collabs at all, or that
Yes.
you do collabs with a very small number of people that you are very familiar with. Gary, for example, that you even said
Mhm.
at this point you don't really consider that a collab, and that makes sense
Oh
with
no.
how well the
He's
two of
just an
you know each other.
accessory.
That's just sort of
And he knows that.
yeah.
So does Justa. They're my accessories.
They are part of the many.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very much so. And yeah, I did. I started doing nothing. I started doing nothing but collabs, and that was because I have hilariously, it's not like a fear of being alone, but like I do have this fear of a quiet chat. And the reason that I have that is because I cannot, and I know that it would happen, I can't risk narrating everything that I do in a game and filling that silence. I can't risk that suddenly being muscle memory because I have to work with people. And
Mm,
like when you're doing say surgeries and things like that, narrating everything you do when you're doing it by yourself, that's weird. So I couldn't risk that being a thing. And so I was like, well, how do I fix that? Oh, I know, don't play by myself. And so I did it was like 7 months cuz my first solo stream was I made the mistake of letting everyone else pick it was Alien Isolation on September 24th of 2021. And I started streaming like technically in February, but I didn't really pick up like the amount of streams that I did until like June. And I was doing 4 to 5 days a week of streaming and they were always collabs. Always collab.
that's impressive. And I say this as someone who literally only deals in collabs because I set up, a couple of collabs at a time. I only do one a week or so, and usually, if I'm lucky, I can get two or three planned in advance. Being able to plan
Mhm.
that many is it's not necessarily difficult. in the coordination that, once you have folks on board, it's just, it's on the
Mhm.
calendar, that's fine. But folks have very crazy schedules, and certain
Mhm.
times work for some people, certain days work, some don't. And being able to just find folks and have that overlap in and of itself is already really impressive, and being able to string together so many for that duration of time.
And well, I had my like team. So we had our jokingly it was our scrub team 6.
Mm.
And now it's down to like I have Rex and Sweets, who one of my snakes is named after Sweets. I love you, Sweets. It's the dumb one. Um because like the stuff that we do together was always like we used to only play Phasmo, which is again in itself hilarious. And just the stuff, us screaming across the house at each other and things like that. It was like we had the team that worked together. And so, like, they have their own command in the chat and everything. It's just like, oh, who are these people that I'm with? It's these two. It's my scrub team 6. And we would just be like, okay, do we want to play Phasmo or do we want to play something else? And it's like we had our days at work because Sweets is like a full-time artist, and Rex goes between doing full-time freelance art and occasionally the part-time job. So it's like we had to just go back and forth and figure out what works. And we had our set days where it was like uh Monday and Wednesday were always like great for us and we were able to do that. And then occasionally we would throw in another person here and there and like, oh, I got my Friday free. Do you want to do Friday? Yeah, sure. Because I didn't have a schedule. So I didn't have to really, I didn't know that having a schedule was a thing. And so I would just kind of show up and stream. And it ended up just being a ton of fun. And that's how I met people because they're like, oh, you do collabs all the time. Do you want to do this with me? And I'm like, sure, let's do it, which is very scary now. But when you're just starting and you're like, oh, I don't understand I like not really being a community leader or anything like that, it's really fun to just kind of be like, oh sure, whatever, just come right on it. And we like it ended up being such a thing, and then all of a sudden it got to the point where my chat didn't stop and I couldn't balance giving the right amount of attention to my chat versus the people I was with. And
Mm.
then when my schedule picked up as well, there was the added anxiety of I will have like at some point I am going to have to cancel, and I don't want to disappoint the person that has been trying to collab with me. So I just cut collabs because I knew that there were people that understood more than others. That I was like, like for example, Faye Graves is another one. Like I'm doing a collab with him on Wednesdays right now because I know that if anything happens in my schedule and I send him a message and go, hey, like it could be like 5 minutes after we should have started, and I can be like, hey, I'm stuck at school. He's gonna be like, bet, I'll go play Minecraft or something like that. And I know I'm not disappointing them because they completely understand. Whereas
Yeah.
someone who maybe has wanted to try to collab with me for a month, and if I send them something the same day that's like, hey, I'm gonna be stuck here, I'm really sorry, I know that's going to be disappointing.
Yeah.
And so that is just a level of anxiety that I can't deal with. So again, the solution was for a while I have to pull back from that. Like
Mm.
I'll probably be doing that this semester as well because I'm now teaching on top of things.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Also, Lishy the Dwarf, thank you for the follow. You mentioned that
Yes.
you got sort of strong armed into teaching a class
Yep.
that you have not taken yourself, and that you are going to be learning with the class, and that
Yep.
you're going to be doing sort of performance fake it till you make it. And that, to be fair, in some ways, being able to teach something is not necessarily uh, sorry, having total expertise in a subject is not necessarily required to teach the subject.
Yes.
That as long as you are good at learning and good at communicating, that you can just read the
Mhm.
material a day before having that class and still be a perfectly effective instructor.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's an ideal situation.
Oh, it's not at all. And it's not even like it's an entry level course either. I am teaching neuroanatomy and physiology to pre-med students essentially. And so I have enough anxiety that I will rock this class and I know it, but at the same time it's like it's going to riddle me with anxiety because I have to make sure that like if they ask me a question, I have to be able to be like, all right, hold up, let me look this up and make sure that it's right. And I've
Mhm.
learned that students appreciate that as well when you're like, well, I don't know the answer off the top of my head, so let's both dive into
Yeah,
material. Like,
they'd certainly prefer to get the right
yeah.
answer than the fast one. That usually they're going to understand, all right, I don't
Mhm.
want my professor teaching me the wrong thing, because then I'm
Yeah.
going to be wrong down the line. Then I'll look bad. So I will,
Mhm.
let them make sure that they are right.
Yeah. And so unfortunately that's taking my Thursdays, which are normally my nights with Gary. So we have to figure that out in the schedule. I was hoping to get out of it and do like one of the day courses, but they were like, no, we need Thursday nights. And I'm like, fine. So, and that's one of those things now where I want to do like Sundays with LGI, which is what I normally do, which is Soph and Justa. And then Thursdays we're going to be with Gary. And then because we're playing Grounded and we want to actually make some like headway on it, we were playing Thursdays and Fridays. So that also, having my channel go back to just collabs also isn't fair to the rest of the community, because I know that we love spending time just talking together. Like there's a ton of streams where, one, I'm always late. My schedule say the time and a plus just in case.
Yeah.
But and again, everybody knows that I'm late to every single thing that I do. It's always who I'm with is also always late. I think my funniest example is Wednesday. Graves and we got all ready to do our game, and then we went to do the audio testing, and Steam went, so where do you want to put it? When I tried to open it, I realized that I forgot to download the game.
Oops.
And like that's the kind of thing where it's like, we live in the world of Scuff, and we were cracking up because he's like, I was on time, and I'm like, you sure were. And then he roasted me for the 45 minutes that it took me to download the game. But like that's the kind of thing where those are the collabs that I can do, because I know that, like, of course we're razzing each other back and forth about like how mad he was about it, and it's all a bit. And whereas I can do that bit with him, whereas someone else would have every right to be legitimately angry at me. But again, that's one of those things where it's like, when I am going into my lab at 4:00 in the morning and having to go until like, I don't know, 9-10 p.m., I'm gonna forget things. And so I don't feel like it's fair. Yeah, and it's like, I don't feel like it's fair to, do things like that for collaborators, because again, like, it's not fair. And I do think that people would have legitimate reasons to be upset, but it's like, I am so scatterbrained right now until things like calm down, which will probably be summer, that it's not fair. And so, it's now going to be balancing the time that I will be able to stream, as well as having to give myself time to continue to do background updates on the channel, like making my own bit redeems, which I do too.
You're making what amounts to an OVA behind the scenes.
Yeah. It wasn't supposed to be like that, but it is. It was supposed to be a little 5-minute video, and now it's 21. And it looks really good though. But like, and that's the thing, because this is like, you were asking me like, where do you find the time? I have ADHD, and so when things are exciting, I will hyper focus. I will make times for them. And being that this is my creative outlet, that's what I do. I make time for it. And like, my schedule, I essentially make based on my experiments. So if I am doing something, like there were a few nights in November and December where I had to go in at 8 p.m. to start something, and I didn't get home until 4:00 in the morning. So the next day I would either just show up to my lab in the afternoon, or I would just go until say noon, and then I would go home, take a little nap, and then get ready for stream. And I'm lucky in the sense that I can move around my streams like that. Like the Cryptid and we've talked about, which is with Josh, who I live with. He and I have talked about like, what if I just, because I'm more of a late night crowd. He was like, what if you just do your early mornings, come home, take a nap until say 6 or 7, and start your streams a little later, and then go until morning. And I was like, I could do that. And he's like, you're probably going to get more sleep if you do it that way than you normally would. And I was like,
yeah, perhaps ironically that just, shifting a sleep schedule to, well, fit your schedule, that even if it is sort of unorthodox, that I did that not to the same extreme as you for a time, but there was a time that I was working with some folks who were overseas, and that due to time zones, I voluntarily I talked with the person I report to, and was like, it makes sense for me to start coming in 3 hours early and to leave 3 hours early, because that gives me more time overlap with the other team that we are working with, and to be able to communicate with them more and make it so that, currently I'm getting in at this time and they've already been in for 3
Yeah.
hours, sort of sitting on their hands, or like, maybe they work for an hour and have a plan prep, but they need to run it by us before doing the thing. And this is just wasting everyone's time. Plus, then they leave at this hour, and then I'm sitting on my hands for the last 3 hours. So let's just
Yeah.
make this efficient. And it was really cool because it felt like a school schedule where I wake up really early, but also get out in the afternoon, and there's still
Yeah.
daylight, and I have all this other stuff. And yeah, half the time I would come back to my apartment and take a nap for an hour or so. And it wound up sort of having, I felt like I had 2 days in a day that I had the work day, because I would then sleep right after work, then wake up and then have a day off, and then go to sleep
Mhm.
and then have a work day. And it was weird for a couple of years, but I liked it. Things have since shifted back, but it's the type of thing that I realized that that was more efficient, both in terms of work, but also in terms of sleep, because uh, it wound up finding that rhythm for me. And sometimes you look for these different solutions, and hopefully you
Mhm.
found one that ends up working for you in the long run, or at least for as long as you need it.
Yeah. We're hoping. I don't know what I'm gonna do yet, but we're still kind of figuring it out because I was still trying to push for getting the early day one, and now I'm not. So they're
Mm,
like, no, you're still teaching at 4 o'clock. I'm
Welcome.
like, "Ugh, okay,
Uh,
so it's fine. We'll figure it out. But it's one of those things where like cause somebody was like, well, why don't you take a semester off of streaming? And it was like, no. Like this is my social life. I
yeah.
live in the middle of nowhere, so it's like and the people that I work with, while I love that I work with them, we actually just had this big conversation because I am very much open communication, where I was like, I love you guys. I do. I love working in the lab with you. I'm so happy that I have you as my lab mates, but it stops there. Like outside of lab, we have nothing in common, and I'm not going to force that.
Oh, I have
Like,
a lot in common with the folks that I work with on
mhm,
a day-to-day basis, and I really have no interest in hanging out with them outside of work. And
yeah,
that's even with the overlap of just, you spend so much time with them that you want to
I
have
want to get away
time
from
away.
you.
And it, very similarly, I have a lot of respect for the folks that I work with. The folks I work with
Mhm.
have wonderful personalities. I'm very fortunate to work with the folks that I work with. But at the same time, it ends there. And
Yeah.
it's just, uh, that's how I operate. And uh, it's very logical that you would not want to give up streaming just because this is
Mhm.
not work for you, that this is not uh, a obligation, that you're doing this because you want
Yeah.
to and because you have fun, and like you said, it is your creative outlet. And if
Yeah.
anything, removing that would just end up
Oh,
being
yeah.
counterproductive, that's going to
It
end
would
up
absolutely
yeah.
kill my mental state.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. So
And
you just
it's kind
find
of
what works.
funny. Yeah, I this is not only my social life and my creative outlet, but it is actually a form of therapy. So, for my masters, I actually have diagnosed PTSD because, like I was telling you, I was going in at 6 o'clock in the morning and not coming home until 10:30 at night. And because of that, my brain was constantly on. And again, that fear of disappointing other people is a huge part
Mm.
of it. And so being able to stream, and why my personality on stream, while I'm still like chaotic even in the lab, I'm a little more safety oriented, slightly, not a lot, but slightly more safety oriented in the lab.
Just enough for
Um,
regulation.
just enough for regulation. Is because what this allows me to do is it again, because ADHD, you need that, like, you need somebody to be that accountability for you. This makes it so that I am forced to go play games. I am forced to go be social in my mind because people are expecting me to show up. And if I put that schedule out, that keeps me on the okay, people know I'm supposed to be live.
Gobby Lynn!
Gabby.
Welcome in,
Gabby.
Raiders. Welcome in, Gobby Lynn. This is VTuber Talk. I'm Jay. I'm talking with many right now, and we may be
Hi.
sending you along your way in just a little bit, actually, because Many has a D&D session to get to. But thank you so much for the raid, Gobby. Really, really great to see you. We do have just a couple more questions, and I was actually just about to say that it's always kind of sad when I have to sort of railroad a show to the
Mhm.
end when it's clear that we could talk for ages. But at the same time, you were already talking about how busy your schedule is and that you don't actually do a ton of one off collabs with folks that you don't talk with on a regular
Mhm.
basis. So I'm just flattered and happy that we were able to make the time for this, because I reached out to you a while back, several months
Mhm.
ago, and you were in the middle of several studies at that point. And we knew, all right, we're going to have to put this off for some amount of time. So I'm glad that we were even able to just have this time. And it's
Yeah.
been such a joy being able to go through different things of academia, your history, going through your 7 degrees, as it will be. Uh, I saw in the chat, Professor Dr. Many, and you're going to have to deal with people like Dr. Many sounds like a comic book villain name.
Super villain. Yeah, oh absolutely. Works very well. And
But
hilariously, my IRL name doesn't sound right without doctor in front of it. So my
mm,
parents have set me up for that.
but I do have a couple of questions that I always ask at the end of the show to sort of
Yeah.
wrap things up. The first of which, do you have any goals for 2023 that we are a little bit more than halfway through January? Do you have anything, whether it be project based or, I want to do this type of stream a bit more, could be metrics based that we didn't even get into how your interest and expertise in statistics could impact streaming and those types of analytics, but a conversation for another day. But do you have any goals for the year?
Gonna get my check mark at some point, of course. We're gonna do the V2 debut, which is also a goal here for the next few months as well. And then we have the one lore video coming out, and I would love to get 1 or 2 more out by the end of the year. And those are my big goals
Mm,
because I'm
and
having way too much fun with them.
I certainly think that, the V2 is well on the way. That's just going to be
Yes.
once it's ready, it's ready. And I very, very strongly believe that it is a when, not an if, of you adding a little bit
Yes.
more purple to your profile.
I hope so. I hope so.
And I'm quite confident. And like I said, it's just going to be the matter of when, not if. That I've seen folks have to put in multiple applications. I've seen folks submit an application, get something back 48 hours or less later. Uh, Partner applications are a very fickle thing.
Yeah, I've done
So
that already. I've done a few, and I've gotten a lot of the auto ones, and I know why. Again, like you were talking about the statistics, like my demo day that was supposed to be the debut was like literally, I think like fourfold what I usually do, and so that triggered the automatic like we want it to be more consistent, which makes sense. And like I knew that was gonna happen, and so it was like just a matter of waiting, and so we'll figure it out. Like I won't be applying for a while because I know that again I'm gonna have the debut here soon. I'm not allowed to drop a date. Gary will scream at me if I drop a date before we get the video done. So I'm not allowed to say that just yet. But I won't be applying until I know that like things have evened out a little bit more on that front. So it'll be a little bit, but we'll apply eventually.
mm. And the last question, it's one I ask all my guests. What does being a VTuber mean to you? And that is not what is the definition of a VTuber, but VTubing is really a new frontier in terms of content creation, self expression, and just fun. And some folks have a very personal attachment to their model. I've had folks say VTubing lets me get in touch with my inner child or lets me be someone I can't be in real life. I've had folks who take a more clinical approach and say it's a mask I wear. It's a tool in my toolbox as a content creator, as an entertainer that I think is more fun than being a face cam streamer, but I don't necessarily feel an emotional attachment to my model. And
Mhm.
anything in between beyond there is totally legitimate. There is no one right way to be a VTuber, but it does have a slightly different meaning to everyone. So, to you, many, what does being a VTuber mean to you?
Oh man, that's such a loaded question. Like it started as sort of the mask thing where it was like, oh, I can have fun with this and not have to be a face cam streamer because I learned that I didn't want to do an hour every day of, hair and makeup when I wanted to do it because it stopped me again being that I only did collabs. It stopped me from doing a lot of impromptu collabs because I'd have to get ready. And I was like, oh man, this little, reactive thing is kind of cool. And it evolved almost essentially the same way that my D&D character evolved on me, where it was like a joke at first, where it was like, oh, it was something to do, and I was having fun changing the PNGs for literally every game or who I was with. I would like, draw some of their outfit on, the mini PNG or whatever game I was playing. I would put like a pirate hat or the Viking hat or something on her, and then it became like a project of, oh, what can I do with the VTuber itself? And then that evolved into like it just, what more can I do, and what can I do with the time that I have, for as far as like the model itself and the art and the creativity that I do behind it. But like, as far as the content creation thing goes, is this was never something like, this will always be a hobby for me. Unfortunately, as much as I would love to do this kind of thing like full time, I've, as you obviously know, and just being able to talk to me for as long as we did about the academic side, I love what I do and I know how important it is, and I could never give that up. And so, this being a hobby, I actually started this thinking that basically being a big titty kobold on the internet is going to give me another like degree of separation where I'll just be able to do this as like my side thing and keep my focus on my IRL stuff when it comes to my social life. And then when I moved out here for school and became basically isolated from the rest of the world, and I live somewhere that people don't even think exists, I found myself suddenly, like, essentially my fates intertwined with people that I thought I was going to be able to keep away from me. And I have met my best friends, my missing pieces. Like, this is not only like a form of therapy for me as far as like the entertainment side goes, but my entire support system, my friend group, my social activity, like, the community building was such a side aspect that I didn't expect to fall in love with. But I will fight absolutely to the death that I have the best community. And it's not just because, like, I will get emotional over this, I swear. Like, it's not just because, like, oh, they're here to support me. It's the exact opposite. Like, we joke around, like my cryptid and I, we joke around all the time where I can't joke about saying that I run a cult anymore. I do. And we've used it in such a cool, positive way that I can point in any general direction to be like, get them. Like, this person needs help. Or they're doing, even if it's like, oh, monetarily I can't help, that's fine. Like, build everyone up. And I have such a positive community that is just able to be, a crutch if someone needs it, to be able to be there to lift up everyone around them, to be able to help them like with donathons, whether it's the marketing aspect of it, spreading it around, actually, doing the money thing for it, helping with ideas, just making sure that everybody grows together. Whether it's at the same speed or not, no one matters. We don't sit there and leave people behind. Like, there is something for everyone. We joke around about it being the cult of many works so well, but it does, because we have created in this community such a safe space for people to unapologetically be themselves and allow others to do the same thing and grow. Like, the amount of stories that I've gotten from people that have been like, it's not just you, it's the community that you surround yourself with that has helped me find myself, or help me find an aspect that I didn't know that I needed to, even think about. And that to me is what this has turned into. It's no longer like, oh, I'm just doing this to make sure that I turn my brain off, or oh, I'm doing this to, I'm doing content creation. This is essentially like a whole different part of me that I've been able to, again, make a safe space for people who just need it that I didn't know. And it has evolved into something so much bigger that I didn't even know was a possibility.
You are the one,
And
you
I
are the
love
many.
it.
And
I am.
I always ask that question because while I never know exactly how someone will answer, the answers always make sense. And it ties into, like you said, a lot of the things we've been discussing, that everything just from your love of learning and knowledge and, starting out, okay, I just want to be able to do this thing and not even realizing that you're VTubing, and then going on to learn how to make your own model and how to stream and how to just make a community and do all these different things that you didn't necessarily set out to do, but your own evolving uh, just desire to know things and learn things and be the best that you can be is something that is consistent between this and your academic work. And it all does add up and still feel very consistent and logical all the way through. And I think it's so cool that you've been able to really sort of just stumble across all this and then run with it as you have, because like I said, I think that check mark is an inevitability. And
Thank
at
you.
the same time, it's so cool that you've been able to find that balance. And even if it means that you sleep a little bit less, to be frank, I don't think that many folks end up sleeping as much as they perhaps technically should. And hey, if anything, you are the most qualified person to minimize sleep because you know the science of it so darn well that you know how to maximize what sleep you get. That you
I
are
do. I've
actually
min-maxed sleep.
you've min-maxed sleep, and that you have that knowledge, and that it is very clear that you, even if are perhaps, a little bit run thin, that you have still managed to keep things in a very safe and healthy balance, and that you are self-aware enough to make sure that you don't accidentally, reach a breaking point, or that you'd be able to recognize if you were approaching a breaking point. And that's all you can really do, because
Yeah.
whether it's work, life, any type of content creation, that it's natural and fun to want to push yourself and see how far you can go. And it's just the recognition of, all right, I'm starting to either burn out or impact my health negatively, and just being able to recognize and react. And I think that you're very much capable of that, and that's why you've been able to go and be as successful as you have been with the many, many things that you do with your life. And it's, like I said, just been so much fun being able to talk about all of your different research. I love being able to get someone on a good rant, and I feel like I got several good rants out of you today. And I know we could have gotten more, but I do want to let you have some time to eat, refresh, be ready for D&D and everything. We didn't even talk about the OGL stuff, but don't worry, there's a lot of other folks talking about that right now. So if
Yeah.
you're really curious about what's going on in the D&D community, YouTube, or I'm sure there's other streams happening with that. But
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Melissa, Tiefling Melissa, is still talking about that right now.
well, I was going to say, the very last thing is, who do you want us to raid?
Ooh. Let me look.
But while Many is looking at that, thank you everybody in chat for being here, even if it was just for a little bit, even if you're lurking. Gobulin, thank you so much again for the raid. Really appreciate you sending everyone by. If you all are interested in more shows like this, that I do these shows about once a week, but I'm also going to end up doing a couple oddity streams that I do need to do an ASMR stream. I'm going to be reading the script from The Room. All of that is because we raised an incredible $7,500 during my second anniversary charity marathon for Child's Play. So I do need to make good on several rewards. I was able to get all the prizes out earlier this week, and I'll be taking care of a couple other things. So if you're interested in more shows like this or any of that silliness, feel free to follow me here on Twitch or Twitter. And even if you're not following me, be sure to follow Many. That we have the links down at the bottom of the screen. I've done some shout outs. And if you're watching on YouTube, hi YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. But Many's links are also going to be in the video description. So definitely be sure to check out all of her stuff if for some reason you aren't already following her. Sounds like you might have someone for us to raid.
I think I do. I might as well.
Of course,
Oh
yes.
no, I just died. Yeah, of course I'm going to. We're gonna have
Oh yeah,
to
nice
raid
and
into
simple.
Gary.
We're going over to Gamer Goblin Gary. Be sure to spam any of Gary's or Many's emotes that you have. Let him know that Many sent you all. I'm sure he probably is very aware and gonna recognize what's going on right away. But that's going to be a lot of fun. So again, Many, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Of course.
I know that you've got a lot of really cool stuff on the horizon. I can't wait to see it. And to Chad, thank you all again for being here. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. This has been Vtuber Talk. I'm Jay. She's Many. I will see you all next time.
Have a good one.